wind knifed to the gaps in my parka and found every patch of sweat that had cooled on my back, turning it to ice. The column ahead of me stretched along the narrow mountain road like a single thread pulled tight between ridges. Khaki figures hunched under packs that seemed twice their weight in this thin air. Boots crunched on brittle snow, each step a snap that echoed off granite walls. And the sound blended with the rasp of our breathing, the metallic rattle of M1 clips knocking against canteen cups, and the low wind that never let up. I kept my eyes on the man in front of me, Corporal Hendershot, the tail of his scarf frozen stiff in the angle of his collar, white frost creeping over olive drab. He'd hitch his pack up every 50 paces, left shoulder right, and I timed my own adjustments to his. Little rituals like that kept a rhythm, kept your mind from wandering to how far we still had to climb. We'd pushed off from Kotori at gray dawn, though dawn and dusk blurred in this place, daylight thinned by snow clouds that never promised relief. Each of us silent, saving breath for the long haul up to the reservoir. No trucks passed that last switchback. Road too narrow, too slick, too exposed. The motors faded behind us, leaving only our own heartbeats and the distant cough of diesel generators at rear supply points, swallowed quick by the mountains. Isolation settled heavy. Somebody behind me muttered it felt like we were marching off the edge of the earth. Nobody contradicted him. I remember noticing how the snow here wasn't the clean, fluffy stuff back home, but hard as glass. Layers of sleet welded together by freeze after freeze. Each crunch underfoot felt like stepping on old bones. When the wind gusted, it picked up shards and flung them against our faces like sandblasting grit. I pulled my hood lower, but the sting still needled cheeks, nose, ears. Some guys wrapped bandanas over mouths. Those froze into stiff masks within minutes, white crust outlining every breath. We joked about them looking like bank robbers, jokes that came out in short, ragged bursts, quickly dying in the air. The ridgeline to our right climbed toward a pale, washed-out sky. Clouds scratched across it like torn cotton, the sun just a dim coin we rarely saw. On the left, a gorge dropped away into shadows where scrawny pines bent under ice. If you stared too long at that drop, your balance went funny. So we kept eyes front, step steady. Every so often, Lieutenant Malloy, up near the point, turned and waved us to close ranks, commanding, "Don't leave gaps should the Chinese spot us from the heights." We'd heard the rumors. Tens of thousands of them fanning through the hills, camouflaged in white, moving at night. Officially, we were just probing north, but everyone felt the same knot in the gut. We were walking straight into something big. Hendershot kept humming under his breath, a gravelly tune I recognized as Sentimental Journey. He always did that when nerves crept in. I found myself matching his tempo with my boots. Step, step, hum, step, step, hum, until the melody wormed into my own head. Funny, something from the radio back stateside following us into this frozen nowhere made me think of warm kitchens, slick dance floors, the smell of frying bacon on Sunday mornings, images bright as flares against all the white. But those pictures hurt if you held them too long, so I focused instead on the present. The weight of the garand slung over my shoulder, the promise of coffee somewhere up ahead with the engineers, the small shape of Corporal Hendershot's helmet bobbing like a buoy in sea spray snow. Around midday, if you could call that hazy glow midday, Sergeant Pena passed down the line that we'd halt for 10 minutes. "Take a knee, not a seat," he said, voice hoarse. "Sit too long, you freeze to the rock." We formed a loose cluster on a shelf overlooking the valley we'd climbed, rifles stacked but still within arm's reach. I took off a glove to fish out a chocolate bar, brown mass frozen solid. I snapped off pieces with my bayonet, sucking on them till numb gums thawed them half soft. Morales flicked his Zippo a dozen times before a flame caught. He shielded it with cupped hands so Smith could light a ration heater, hoping for half-warm beans. Wind whipped the flame sideways but couldn't kill it. Small victories mattered. Somewhere far off, a single rifle shot cracked, sharp and lonely. Then nothing. Conversations died mid-sentence. We turned our heads like deer, ears straining. After a minute, Malloy muttered uneasily, "It was probably rock scouts clearing a stray mountain goat." We nodded but exchanged looks. Goats don't sound like a 7.62 Mauser. The silence after that felt thicker, like the mountains themselves were holding breath. Break came and went. We rose, stiff-jointed, wrists and knees creaking. Hoisted packs fell in. Snow had drifted across our earlier prints, filling them as though trying to erase our presence. New flakes spiraled down, fine as dust, turning rifle barrels pale. I kept wiping the front sight with a mittened thumb, not that it stayed clear for long. The road narrowed further, hugging rock face so tight that our right shoulders brushed jagged shale. On the left, the drop grew steeper. No guardrails, just the knowledge that one slip meant a long, unbroken fall. Late afternoon light drained, color washing from world to grayscale. Our column's shadows stretched thin across the snow, then vanished as the sun ducked behind ridge teeth. Temperature plummeted. My breath fogged thicker. Condensation froze against my scarf. Eyelashes rhymed over, blinked too slow, and lids might seal. I flexed fingers in trigger mittens, feeling the stiff leather resist. Once in a while, someone stumbled, and another man grabbed his strap, pulling him upright before momentum carried both downslope. No one said thank you. wearily. Gratitude spent energy. But those silent rescues built a ledger of brotherhood deeper than words. We'd been warned about the Siberian Express, the wind that funneled down from Manchurian plains, and when it hit near dusk, it lived up to its name. Gusts roared between peaks, flattening scarves against noses, tearing loose anything not buckled. It moaned through pine needles, set them tinkling like glass ornaments. Somewhere behind me, I heard wind slam a helmet rim so hard the liner cracked, determined. We lowered heads, shoulders hunched, still moving.
Then came the smell. Cordite? No. Wood smoke, faint at first, then stronger, curling on the wind from ahead. We shared a spark of hope, maybe an advanced supply dump, shelter, warmth. But any Marine learns early. Smoke in enemy country rarely means comfort. Malloy ordered point squads to spread a few yards, rifles unslung. The only words he voiced were, "Eyes open, boys." We reached a bend where the road split around a rocky hump. Ground here flattened enough for a small clearing, abandoned log huts, roofs half collapsed under snow. No lights, no movement, but the smoke drifted from behind those huts, rising straight into slate clouds. Malloy signaled me and Hendershot forward. We advanced, boots whispering on crust, rifles leveled. The huts loomed silent, doorways dark like missing teeth. I could feel my heartbeat in fingertips, hammering against rifle stock. We edged around the first cabin. A small fire burned in a pit, white ash, embers dull red. Whoever made it had left moments ago. Heat still shimmered. Beside the pit lay a tin can, soup or beans, crushed by a boot heel. Tracks led north, deeper into trees already filling with snow. Chinese? KPA stragglers? Hard to tell. Hendershot crouched, touched the ash, yanked hand away. "Hot," he mouthed. No words out loud. We backed slowly until the lieutenant waved us in. He studied the scene, eyes narrowing, then ordered us to double interval, rifles at the ready. Word rippled rearward, urgent, possible contact. The column changed character in an instant. March became hunt. Footfalls softened, conversations ceased entirely. The only sounds, wind, gear clicks, my own breath amplified inside helmet. Visibility dropped as twilight buried the road in shadow. Each tree, each boulder turned suspect shape. I could almost hear hearts beating in unison, syncopated with crunch of snow. We passed the huts, scent of burnt wood fading, and resumed the climb. Around another switchback, the mountains opened into a wider valley, white plain framed by sawtooth ridges. The reservoir lay somewhere beyond, iced over thick enough to bear tanks, they said. But at that moment I cared more about the silence. Too deep, too complete. Even the wind quieted. A brief hush, as though the world paused to listen. Then, crack, a rifle shot split the stillness from high left. Another crack answered on the right, sharper, closer. Snow kicked up at Malloy's boots. He dove behind a rock spur. The air filled with the angry buzz of rounds seeking flesh. Somebody shouting, "Incoming!" We dropped where we stood, bellies to snow so cold it burned. Silence shattered into chaos. Steel on steel clatter as bolts slammed forward. Men cursing, boots scrambling for scant cover among ice-slick stones. I tasted cordite now,
metallic on the back of my tongue, Garin stock pressed against cheek, sight picture dancing as adrenaline surged. I scanned the ridges, nothing but dark shapes and drifting snow. Yet the shots kept coming, irregular, probing like fingertips against a locked door. Each report echoed through gullies, ricocheting until direction blurred. We waited, breath frosting thick enough to hide behind, hearts pounding. Behind me, someone, muttering a prayer, half lost in wind. I swallowed hard, felt the warmth of fear spread through stomach, and kept my finger tense on the trigger, waiting for the shadow that would give shape to the threat, knowing the night was about to explode. The mountain absorbed our silence once more, just long enough for hope to flicker. And then another shot cracked, closer, definite. Snow sprayed my sleeve. The battle for Chosin had found us. The crack of that last round still hung in the air when our squad leader bellowed,
"Fire by pairs! Pick your ridgeline!"
The order tore through the wind like a whip. Garand snapped from safe to fire, 8 round clips sliding home with that clean metallic schlunk every Marine recognizes in his bones. I settled into the notch between 2 boulders, elbows buried in crust, so hard it bruised through my parka sleeves. The world narrowed to the irons a handspan from my eye, front blade bouncing against breath fog, rear aperture ringing my target on pure instinct. Black dot at the edge of snow, top of a silhouette just visible for half a heartbeat before it ducked. I squeezed. Recoiled, jarred shoulder, brass arced, clip clanged, a faint cry drifted down past the ridge. Or maybe that was wind twisting through rocks. Hard to tell when the mountain played ventriloquist. Return fire crackled in flurries, short bursts, disciplined, whoever was above us clearly comfortable with guerrilla sniping. A bullet clipped a pine trunk 2 feet from my helmet, showering splinters. The smell of fresh sap flashed me back to summer hikes in the Sierra Nevadas, so out of place it almost made me laugh. Then something hit close enough that stone chips stung my cheek and the moment vanished. On my left, Hendershot picked targets methodically, his humming gone, replaced by low growls each time he exhaled. Between shots we could hear Peña calling ranges, his voice calm, counting yards like a grocery list. 350, 320, 300 even. Then corrections as our tracers walked toward the flashes. Light drained so fast it felt as if someone dimmed the whole theater. Twilight soaked into indigo, silhouettes on the ridges melted into background, until rifle flares were the only reliable landmarks, pale tongues licking darkness. Lieutenant Malloy crawled along our line, patting shoulders, whispering to keep rate slow, conserve ammo. We still hadn't seen more than scattered figures, but everyone sensed what that meant. Probes, feeling us out, finding weak spots before the real hammer came. We fought that skirmish for maybe 20 minutes, time warped by adrenaline, before the firing eased. One last shot echoed, then silence rolled back in, broken only by ragged breaths and the distant hiss of wind running through pine needles. Frost had formed on my helmet rim, rhyming the USMC stenciled letters. I flexed numb fingers inside mittens, then reached for a fresh clip, thumbed it into the receiver and slapped the bolt home. The solid, metallic bite felt reassuring, like locking a front door in a bad neighborhood. Malloy ordered us to dig in where we stood. Firmly, "We're not backing down the road," he said. "If they want this trail, let 'em bleed for every yard." Shovels clanged against ground hard as poured concrete. The first stroke sent vibrations up arms already trembling with cold. We had TNT charges for blasting holes, but the lieutenant didn't want to give away exact positions with explosions, so we hacked. Pickaxes chipped sparks off buried rock. After 10 minutes, we'd scooped maybe 2 feet of slush, just enough for knees. It wasn't much, but lying prone behind that lip felt better than sitting on open snow. Night settled full and final, a velvet so thick even the white ground faded to gray. Clouds masked what little moonlight might have helped. We switched to red-lensed flashlights, tiny bullseyes of glow inside cupped palms, just bright enough to unwrap K-rations without ruining night vision. I cracked open a can of ham and eggs, contents congealed into one icy lump. Morales handed me his small, solid fuel stove. We touched flame to the tablet and let it burn under the tin. The heat barely reached the food before the wind stole it, but the smell alone, grease and salt, lifted spirits. We passed the can around, everyone scraping a spoonful, no complaints about germs. Cold like this sterilized everything. That's when we heard them. A single bugle call drifted from the northern ridge. High, wavering, like a trumpet blown by a ghost. It was so unexpected we froze, spoons halfway to mouths. The note held, slid upward, then cut off. Silence followed for 2 heartbeats. And then a chorus answered from the opposite slope, overlapping, different keys, some clashing. The effect was unreal. Music swirling through ravines, weaving between trees, surrounding us in a ring of sound. Morales muttering, shocked, "Jesus, they're talking to each other." Pena growling grimly, "They're talking to us." We scrambled to positions, rifles braced, grenades unsafetied, BAR teams double-checking belts. I felt my pulse thud in throat, breath steaming so thick it fogged my sights. The bugles trailed off, replaced by rhythmic wooden clackers, sticks struck together, tempo quickening like a drummer urging dancers faster. Shadows began to move at tree line, small clusters followed by longer lines, then gaps, then more clusters. No shots yet, just the bugles, the clackers, the crunch of many boots on crusted snow. Malloy hissed for us to hold until flare signal. He wanted them in open ground. I pressed, cheek to stock, laid front sight on a darker blob sliding downhill. My finger floated on trigger slack, muscles screaming to squeeze, but training kept it tight. The waiting was worse than firing, the moment where possibilities multiply. Every shadow could be the man who kills you. Every second's delay might decide if you see sunrise. A green flare finally ripped skyward from Pena's tube, bursting into emerald glare. In its harsh glow, the slope erupted into detail. Dozens, no, hundreds of padded figures in white smocks, rifles slung or at port arms, some carrying bugles, others waving red flags. They marched in uneven waves, knees high to break crust, mouths open in shouts we couldn't hear over wind. The flare hissed, sputtered, died. Darkness sucked them back, but they were closer now, silhouettes deeper black than night. Roaring, "Fire!" Malloy roared, and hell opened. Garans barked in overlapping staccato, 8-round rhythms punctuated by the metallic ping of empty clips ejecting. Bars laid down longer streams, back, bap, 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 tracers streaking like molten beads threading snow. The first wave jerked, staggered, fell. Gaps closed as men behind stepped over bodies. Still they came, bugles wailing anew, a discordant battle cry that pierced even rifle thunder. Someone in our line shouted, "Change target! Left flank!" We shifted, barrels swinging as if guided by one nervous system. I saw shapes closing within 40 yards, faces half lit by muzzle flashes, eyes wide, breath pluming. I squeezed, saw one spin, feet sliding out as he disappeared behind a rock. Another knelt, lifted rifle, flames spurted, bullet cracked past ear like a hornet. I fired again, felt the kick, boat cycling as if on its own. Clips emptied fast. I rammed a fresh 8-rounder home, thumb smarting where bolt kissed nail. Hendershot cursed beside me, jammed casing. He flipped the rifle, slammed butt on ground, working operating rod until brass popped free. Relieved. Back in business, he muttered, and joined the chorus. The Chinese wavered under the combined fire, then melted back toward trees. Bugles kept blowing, cadence shifting to retreat. Within minutes, the slope stood empty, but for dark mounds, scattered like discarded packs. Silence returned, broken only by wind sighing over the dead and the distant groan of ice shifting on the reservoir. My jaw ached from clenching. Sweat inside layers chilled instantly, sending shivers. Peña moved down the line, checking each man, whispering praise, passing extra bandoliers. When he reached me, he clapped my shoulder, hard enough to jolt teeth, firmly. "Good work, rifleman," he said, voice low, but pride glinted in eyes. Hendershot and I used the lull to dig our hole deeper. The top 6 inches of snow scraped away easily, but below lay permafrost, impossible without a pick. We compromised, stacked frozen chunks as a parapet, filled gaps with rucksacks we'd rather keep dry, but life trumped gear. We lined the bottom with pine branches, hacked off nearby saplings, creating a thin cushion between bodies and ice. It helped maybe 5%, better than nothing. After we settled, Lieutenant Malloy called for a 30-yard outpost forward of our foxholes. I drew the short straw with PFC Harris. We crawled to a boulder ridge, set up prone behind it. Rifles laid atop parapet of snow. From there, the valley floor was a ghost field, dark and still. Only faint starlight glinting off abandoned bugles and rifles thrown down in retreat. No movement, yet every nerve screamed they were out there, regrouping, rehearsing that same attack, but bigger. Harris whispered stories of his kid brother in Little League back in Ohio, perhaps to drown fear. I listened, nodding, scanning. Tales of sunshine and aluminum bats felt like dispatches from a different planet. Frost grew across our rifle receivers. When I racked the bolt, ice scraped, threatening to jam. I pulled a small squeeze oil bottle, dripped lubricant, hoping it wouldn't thicken to sludge before the next engagement. An
hour passed. Then another. The sky cleared enough for stars to glitter. Billions, sharp as needles, as if the cold had crystallized even light. The beauty punched me in the gut. The absurdity of that perfect dome above such ruin. My thoughts drifted to home. My old blue Chevy tucked in Dad's barn, my mother's Christmas letters waiting in some mail sack, maybe already stamped "Return to Sender," because no one could keep up with our movements. I wondered if she was putting lights on the porch this year or leaving them boxed out of superstition. Can't celebrate with your boy still at war. Bugles sounded again. Soft this time, far off. 3 quick rising notes, then stop. I nudged Harris. We both raised scopes. Saw nothing. Minutes later, another call. Different ridge. They were mapping us with music. Drawing the outline of our defenses the way a blind man learns a face with fingertips. I felt sweat bead despite freezing air. Peña signaled us back. New defensive line forming closer to road to concentrate fire. We belly crawled, dragging rifles, careful not to silhouette against snow horizon. Rejoined squad, slipped into our foxhole, hearts hammering. Everyone was topping off magazines, stacking grenades like apples, blade bayonets clipped easy reach. Firmly, Malloy moved along trench line reminding us, aim low when they charge. Center mass. Let the slope work for you. His breath fog so thick it looked like smoke from a steam engine. He paused beside me, glanced at my rifle, nodded once, moved on. We lay there, senses stretched tight, waiting. Wind quieted, as if the night itself took a deep breath. I felt the stillness settle heavy. Even rifles seemed lighter, anticipation making matter shift. Then, floating across that hush, bugles began again, not single calls now, but many, layered, overlapping, weaving a wall of sound that rose and fell like surf. Beneath the horns came human voices, chanting, singing. It swelled in volume until bones vibrated. Harris gripped my arm so hard fingernails dug through parka. I swallowed, tasting copper, adrenaline flooding anew. The horns reached a crescendo, and somewhere out there, feet stomped snow, rifles clacked, voices shouted in cadence, shadows surged at timberline, coalescing into dark tide. Our machine gun team snapped bolts home. The first round slammed belt into feed tray. Malloy raised flare pistol, paused, wanting them closer, just a little closer. I found the front sight and breathed once, long and slow, letting lungs empty until chest hollowed. The flare streaked upward, brilliant white against ink sky, and when it burst, the hillside glittered with movement. Lines upon lines of figures advancing in lockstep, bayonets reflecting flare light like rows of teeth in a giant's grin. The wave had returned, wider, deeper. Harris whispered, "Sweet mercy!" though I doubt heaven heard him over that terrible, beautiful clash of bugles and wind. My finger tightened on the trigger. The world funneled into that narrow iron circle as the first rifles raised toward us, and the night lit with fire. Rifles barked all along the line, brass tinkling against ice like sleet on a tin roof. My world shrank to the front sight and the surge of shadowy figures spilling down the slope. White-smocked shapes that flinched when a tracer snapped through the dark, but never seemed to slow. I fired, worked the bolt, fired again, the Garand's familiar ping ringing out when the clip ejected. A fresh 8-rounder slid in. My thumb barely cleared before the bolt snatched forward. A heartbeat later, the man beside me cursed. His BAR had frozen, bolt locked half open. He slammed it against the parapet, metal on rock clanging, then dropped to a knee and pulled his .45, spitting rounds that looked small and lonely against the tide. Bugles shrieked somewhere up the ridge, notes skittering high enough to make teeth ache. They overlapped with wooden clackers, with hoarse shouts in Mandarin, with the roar of our machine guns coughing 5-second bursts, until the entire mountainside sounded like a scrapyard shaken by giants. The flare overhead fizzled out, and for an instant the field went black. When my vision adjusted, muzzle flashes strobed the snow, revealing attackers barely 20 yards away, their bayonets glittering like shards of the moon. "Fix blades!" Pena thundered. I yanked mine from its scabbard, hands clumsy in mittens, and jammed it onto the barrel lug. Steel locked with a satisfying snap, just as a Chinese soldier vaulted the parapet, 2 holes down. Hendershot caught him across the jaw with his rifle butt, a hollow thud that echoed over the wind. The man's bugle flew from his grip, landing in the snow with a dull chime. Another attacker followed, screaming, bayonet thrust low. Hendershot sidestepped, shot him point blank. The muzzle flash lit both faces for a frozen instant, one shocked, one grim and wide-eyed. Then darkness reclaimed them.
More figures poured in. The slope funneled them straight onto our front, bodies bunching in the gully between boulders. A handful made it to the wire and tore at it barehanded, ripping skin on concertina blades. I fired center mass at the closest, felt the rifle butt hammer my shoulder, saw the man jerk backward into his comrades. The column behind stumbled, dominoes on ice, and our machine gun team sowed tracers through the pile. Screams rose, then were whipped away by the wind, a sudden metallic click where there should have been bang. Empty. I slapped my last full clip home, fingers stiff. 5 rounds in, the spring balked. Ice crust had formed along the follower. I cursed, pounded the butt against my boot heel, forced the stack to settle, then chambered around. No time for finesse. They came again, closer, ducking low. Grenades sailed both ways. Ours burst sharp and brutal. Theirs popped with a softer whoomp and a shower of dirt. One landed inside the next foxhole left. An instant white flash, a terrible wet smack. When the smoke cleared, Reese lay curled like a child, legs gone, blood melted a black patch through the snow. He didn't scream. Shock kept him quiet. I grabbed his collar, hauled him over the parapet as rounds snapped overhead. Harris slid in, tied a tourniquet with a strip of field dressing, hands steady, though teeth chattered loud as typewriter keys. No orders needed. Any man still standing took Reese's place on the line. Adrenaline scoured fatigue from limbs. Breath steamed so thick it felt like we fought inside clouds. Then, like a switch thrown, the bugles reversed melody. 3 descending notes, and the Chinese wave broke. Those who could still move peeled off, dragging wounded fading into tree line. A final parting volley cracked across the valley, wild and high. Silence followed, but not the peaceful kind. It carried weight, a sense of unfinished business. I sat back against the trench wall, chest heaving, rifle resting across knees. My mittened hands trembled so hard the front sight danced. I forced slow breaths. Count 4 in, hold, 4 out, until the shakes eased. Lanigan crawled over the parapet, dropping into our hole with a groan. A deep gouge scored his helmet. He chuckled, half hysterical. "They damn near parted my hair," he said, tapping the dent. Hendershot offered his canteen. The water inside was half slush, tasted of metal and chlorine. I swished, spat pink onto the snow, split lip, nothing worse. All around, similar tableaus. Marines slumped in foxholes, frantically reloading, checking buddies for holes in parkas. The battlefield beyond, the stretch we could see, looked like a black quilt dotted with lumps where bodies had fallen. Every few seconds the wind pawed loose clothing, making shapes twitch and rifles swung reflexively, until we realized the dead don't rise. Lieutenant Malloy moved along the line, silhouette stiff, carbine at high port. Hoarsely, "Good work." Short pause. "But they'll be back. Dig deeper, stack ammo, clear jams." He nodded to me. Sternly, your point for counter push if they breach again. Keep that blade sharp." Counter push. The thought settled heavy. We'd practiced bayonet rushes on straw dummies under North Carolina sun, but charging into darkness, over snow packed with fallen enemy, that was a different beast. My stomach tightened, but I managed a curt nod. We dug, scraping frozen earth until knuckles bled. A full moon slipped between ragged clouds now, silvering the landscape, painting bodies in pale outline. Coyotes howled far off, or maybe wolves, someone joked. Even the wildlife wanted a piece of us tonight. Humor came easier after surviving a charge. An hour crawled by. Frost thickened on our packs, turned wool hats into helmets of ice. Peña sent men rearward to scrounge ammo from casualty packs, and to carry the worst wounded toward the road where trucks waited. 2 stretcher teams passed our hole, Reese among them, silent, face gray. I caught his hand as they carried him by. He squeezed once, weak but conscious. Diesel fumes wafted down the trail, the smell of trucks warming engines, ready to haul bloodied Marines back to aid stations farther south. Those fumes felt like rescue, and like guilt for the ones who couldn't ride. Bugles sounded again, not the scattered notes of earlier, but a full chord blasted in unison, so loud it rattled rib cages. Echoes tumbled from ridge to ridge, merging into one great horn of doom. Peña's head jerked up. He barked, forceful, "Stand to! Bayonets!" A ripple of steel slid onto barrels. The order passed quick, practiced now, thumbs unsheathed blades, muscles remembered lugs even through numb gloves. This time the Chinese didn't waste breath on slow approach. They surged from tree line in a solid mass, snow erupting around boots, white uniforms blending with ground until only black gun barrels distinguished them. Our machine guns hammered immediately, tracers carving red ladders into the mob, but the enemy kept forward momentum, absorbing gaps as men fell. I fired, worked bolt, fired, until the rifle bucked empty, no more clips. I drew my Colt, slid restive feet to crouch. Muzzle flashes lit faces 3 yards away, young, frost-burned, eyes wide with determination or fear, maybe both. A bayonet thrust speared over the parapet. I knocked it aside with my rifle barrel, swung the butt up under the attacker's chin. He collapsed onto me, heavy. I shoved him clear, heard Hendershot grunt as he body-checked another who'd vaulted into our hole. The world turned savage, a mess of grunts, steel ringing, snow crunching under twisting boots. Pena blew his whistle. 3 shrill blasts, the signal to counterattack. Up and over! Training yanked me like puppet strings. I vaulted the trench, boots hitting snow with dull thud, bayonet leveled waist high. Around me, silhouettes of Marines did the same, a ragged skirmish line charging uphill into the press. For an instant, I smelled everything at once. Cordite, sweat, blood, diesel, pine pitch, as if the air itself was combustible. I drove the blade forward, felt it meet resistance, thick winter coat, flesh beneath, then yanked free. The man dropped, snow puffing around him. Another lunged, swung a rifle like a club. I ducked, jammed my bayonet into his thigh. "Scree!" he screamed, fell sideways, was lost in the swirl of bodies. My mind recorded the details, but reduced emotion to a single ember. Stay alive. We pushed them back by brutal inches. Machine gun teams shifted forward, firing from hip whenever the line paused. Someone beside me, Lanigan maybe, "Grenade!" Too late. It detonated behind us, concussive slap knocking snow skyward. My ears rang, but feet kept moving. The Chinese line wavered, then broke, men peeling into tree shadows. Our own momentum carried us 5, 10 more paces, until Pena, "Down! Hold here!" We dropped to one knee, rifles ready. No counter-thrust came, only the groan of wounded, the creak of settling ice. Snow began again, fine grains swirling in moonlight, settling on the fallen like burial shrouds. My breath, rasped loud inside helmet. I realized my bayonet was still fixed, tip smeared dark. I wiped it against trouser leg, the blood freezing almost instantly into dull maroon. Pena called for stretcher bearers. In the dim, I saw Harris clutching his shoulder, blood-soaking parka sleeve, steam rising. He tried to wave help away, but his knees folded. 2 corpsmen rushed him, slid him onto a poncho, hauled him toward the rear. Diesel engines revved, headlights flicked on, yellow beams slicing snow as trucks crawled forward to collect more wounded. Their exhaust drifted low, mingling with gunpowder haze until the valley smelled like some hellish motor pool. Grimly, Malloy gathered us along a shallow rise, forming a new perimeter closer to the road. Ammo status ran low, some men down to a handful of rounds. He ordered us to strip clips from the fallen, friend and foe alike. We moved across the field, prying stiff fingers from rifle stocks, shoving cold brass into bandoliers. Thoughtful. I knelt by a Chinese soldier, maybe 17, cheeks frost-bitten black, bugle still strapped across his chest. The horn's mouthpiece glittered with ice crystals. I hesitated, then unclipped the sling, slid the bugle free. A symbol, maybe. Proof of the night. Or a reminder of music that it heralded so much death. Somberly, dawn's first gray smudged the eastern horizon, revealing the full extent of the field, bodies scattered like broken toys. Footprints crisscrossing in desperate patterns, crimson stains already turning brown as they froze. The sky above glowed faint pink at the edges, promising daylight's cold truth. Short pause. Wolves, real ones this time, howled in the distance, scenting carrion. We tightened our cordon, rifle muzzles tracing the tree line, eyes gritty after hours without blinking. Quietly, no one spoke. Wearily. Behind us, trucks growled, their beds filling with blanketed shapes that moaned or lay unnaturally still. Exhaust plumes drifted across the line, carrying murmurs of engine warmth and faraway safety. I felt the temptation tug like a siren song, but knew my place was here, rifle in numb hands, watching the woods. Malloy paced, stopping now and then to clap shoulders, share a terse whisper. Finally, he halted beside me, gaze fixed north up the snow-wound road toward Chosin. "They won't quit," he said. Tonight was just chapter 1. He glanced at the bugle slung across my chest. "Keep that. Might be useful." "How's that, sir?" "You blow it loud at the right moment," he said, eyes narrowing with a tired smile. "Maybe we send 'em some music of our own." I nodded, not sure whether he joked. My fingers brushed the cold brass. It rang faintly, a lonely note stolen by wind. The sun crept higher, color bleeding over ridges. And from somewhere beyond the next rise, faint and defiant, another bugle answered. Single, quavering, taunting. We froze, rifles snapping to shoulders. The echoes circled the valley once more, and every man knew daybreak wouldn't bring rest, only another round. My heart kicked like a piston as I settled behind my sights again, waiting for shapes to emerge from that pale glow, knowing our ammo was thin and the fight had only just begun. We held the ridge all through sunrise, cramped in holes half filled with spent brass and trampled snow. The cold bit sharper once the fighting paused. Adrenaline drained and left joints stiff, fingertips tingling like they'd been slammed in a door. Hendershot kept flexing his right hand, worried the trigger finger was going dead. He tapped it against his helmet, cursing softly, blew on it till steam rose, then froze in the same breath. I didn't feel my toes at all, and that scared me more than the bugles. Frostbite creeps quiet, like sniper fire inside your boots. Malloy's runners brought word from the Talion. Dig a perimeter big enough for trucks to turn and howitzers to sight in. We'd hold here until supply columns clawed up from Koto Ri. We looked at our shovels, then at the rock-hard ground. Laughed the way tired men laugh, short, humorless bursts. But we dug anyway, trading picks, rotating every few minutes so arms wouldn't seize. Sparks flew where steel met permafrost. The smell of struck flint mixed with diesel exhaust, drifting from the road where 6x idled, tailpipes coughing black clouds that hung low before the wind shredded them across the valley. Engine heat drew us like moths. Between shoveling spells, we shuffled down, fingers splayed under manifolds, stealing warmth that burned skin but felt too good to stop. Corpsmen moved among us, checking feet, ears, noses, marking bad cases with grease pencil, F1 for frost nip, F2 for frost bite, evacuation priority. A kid from Able Company limped past, boots cut away, toes wrapped in gauze that seeped blood and iodine. He tried a grin. Guess I'm going home in cotton socks. Then climbed onto a truck bed already stacked 3 layers deep with litters. Wheels churned, chains clanked, the rig groaned into gear and rumbled south, exhaust curling over blanketed forms. I watched until it vanished behind a ridge and felt an empty space open in my chest, half envy, half shame. By noon, the sun showed, a weak circle, like a flashlight, behind wax paper, but the temperature stayed below 0. Frozen breath feathered every mustache. Those without grew ice beards anyway. We heated sea ration cans against engine blocks, the grease inside popping like tiny mortar rounds. I spooned congealed beef and carrots into my mouth, felt the metal lid scorch my lips even while the food went down barely warm. Water was worse, canteen slushy at best. We learned to keep bottles inside shirts against bare skin. Made you shiver, but at least the ice melted. Artillery arrived mid-afternoon. A pair of 105s dragged by weasels, their barrels rimed white. The gun bunnies set up on a ledge just behind our foxholes, wrapping breeches with gloved fists, sighting tubes already frosting over. They swore non-stop about the elevation, the cold, the lousy powder that clumped, soundtrack to our digging. When they finally test-fired, the concussion thumped our chests, showered us with fresh snow dislodged from pines, and sent around screaming north toward peaks we couldn't see. Seconds later, a dull boom echoed back. We cheered, a ragged, weary bark of approval. Morales scanned the sky the rest of the day for airdrop birds, but none came. Clouds rolled in again, thick and low, and somewhere up there our corsairs circled uselessly, unable to find the valley. That meant ammo stayed tight. By evening I had 4 clips left, 2 grenades, 1 smoke. Hendershot was down to 3 clips. He kept patting his bandolier the way a gambler caresses last chips at the table. Just before dusk, Pena ordered listening posts 50 yards out. Harris was still on a truck headed south, so Lanigan and I drew the slot. We crawled past the outer wire, bellies sliding on crust that cracked under elbows. The world felt bigger beyond our shallow trench. No friendly rifle muzzles around, just vast whiteness fading into spruce shadows. We reached a cluster of glacier-smoothed boulders and settled behind the lee side. Wind hissed over the rocks, carrying scents of engine oil and cordite from our lines, and something else, wood smoke again, faint but definite. I imagined enemy campfires hidden in ravines, cooks ladling rice into tin bowls while they plotted the night's assault. We lay there an hour, maybe 2, until the sky turned charcoal and snow began falling in lazy flakes that seemed to hang suspended. Sound muffled, vision shrank to a gray bubble around us. I strained ears for bugles, boots, whispered Mandarin, heard only the slow thump of my own pulse, the occasional metallic ping back in camp as someone wrapped a frozen receiver to clear ice. Lanigan nudged me, pointed down slope. At first I saw nothing, then a darker smear moving across snow, a single figure hunched, carrying something slung across both shoulders. I nudged safety off, thumb stroking cold metal. The shape trudged closer. Moonlight caught a parka hood. U.S. issue. My gut unclenched. The man stumbled, fell to one knee. Sssss. I hissed a challenge code. He answered with the nightly countersign. Ragged boys. Voice ragged. We crawled out, grabbed his arms, hauled him behind the rocks. He was a radioman from Charlie Company, face white as paper, blood crusting his right thigh where padding was sheared away. His handset hung dead, batteries frozen. Lines cut, he gasped. Chinese everywhere, East Ridge. Battalion wants you ready to move at midnight. Break out south. His eyes rolled, shock or fever. We pressed a dressing over the wound, slipped a morphine syringe into his arm. He sighed, sagged, murmured thanks that drifted with his breath into the snow dock. Midnight, breakout. The word hit like a slap. All afternoon we'd fortified, believing defense possible. Now command said run. I pictured those trucks jammed with wounded, the narrow road twisting down mountain shoulders, and felt dread settle heavier than my pack. We carried the radioman back, arms under his pits, feet dragging furrows. Malloy met us at the wire, expression unreadable in the dim. He took the message, nodded once. Pass it quiet, he said. No yelling, no excitement. He knelt by the radio man as corpsman bore him away and squeezed his shoulder, a rare, soft gesture. Orders filtered platoon to platoon, destroy anything that can't ride. Spare gear, ration crates, even unopened ammo boxes too heavy to haul. Demo teams wired the artillery pieces with TNT. The gunners packed fuses, wearing helmets turned sideways to shield sparks from snow. One by one we heard dull crumps up the slope, watched orange blooms sprout like poisoned flowers as barrels split and recoil springs leapt free. Each explosion echoed like a door slamming behind us. We crammed into trucks already idling, boards grimed by muddy boots and smeared blood. Morales climbed in first, took a bench under the tarp, patted the spot beside him. Diesel growled, headlights dim behind grates painted white to mask glare. Engines rattled through frozen mounts, whole frames shivering like dogs in rain. I slung my Garand across knees, fingers checking the action again and again as if repetition could conjure extra rounds. The column rolled just after 0000. Lead jeeps pointed south, their blackout lights tiny fireflies in swirling snow. We moved at walking speed, suspension creaking under weight. Hendershot hummed, low this time, minor key, maybe sentimental journey, warped by fatigue. War's metronome, tires crunch, chain clink, engine cough, wind howl. Inside the bed, men dozed, sitting up, heads bumping metal ribs with each rut. When the truck lurched over potholes, our teeth snapped together. Someone cracked a molar and spat shards into the dark. 2 miles down the pass, the shooting started. Not bugles this time, straight to gunfire, tracers sizzling from tree lines, slamming tailgates with metallic sparks. Drivers jammed accelerators, engines roared protest, but gears caught, and we gained 10, 12 miles per hour. hard left curve appeared. Road narrowed between blind cliffs. The truck swayed, tires skidding on packed ice. Everyone grabbed seats, cursing, swore. Outside, rifles barked. A round punched through canvas, ripped the coat of the man opposite me, missed flesh by inches. He stared at the hole, eyes wide, then, strained laughed. A brittle edge that sounded like glass about to shatter. The convoy guns opened up. 50 cals mounted on half-tracks, muzzle flashes strobing like lightning inside low clouds. Brass cascading in golden arcs that cooled to darkness before hitting snow. I saw tree trunks splinter, branches explode in fountains of white, Chinese silhouettes tumbling. Yet for every figure knocked down, another appeared, firing from the hip, chasing alongside as if the blizzard birthed them. Our driver laid on the horn, a long, strangled bellow lost in engine din, warning of a jackknifed fuel truck blocking the grade ahead. The column braked. Tires screamed, chains sparked on rock. We slammed forward, helmets cracking ribs, rifles clattering. Outside, urgent officers shouted to clear the wreck. I jumped down, boots skidding, and joined a dozen others pushing the crippled tanker's tail toward the cliff edge. Diesel sloshed inside, heavy and cold. We heaved, straining, grunting, boots digging trenches. Enemy rounds pinged off the tank's skin, ricochets whining overhead. One pierced the metal. A thin stream of fuel hissed across snow, steaming like breath. With a final shove, the rig shifted, slid, scraped its rear wheels over the brink, and teetered half a heartbeat before plunging. It smashed onto rocks below, a thud deep enough to feel in bones, then erupted in a column of fire that roared up the canyon, lighting Chinese positions like stage lights. Marines on the ridgeline, excited, cheered and cut loose with everything: rifles, BARs, beanbag grenades. Silhouettes flailed against the firelight, then vanished when the flames dimmed to dull orange. Trucks lurched forward again, tires slipping through spilled diesel. We scrambled aboard as they gained speed, arms yanking us in like fishermen hauling nets. I collapsed on the wooden slats, chest heaving, diesel fumes stinging nostrils. Hendershot passed his canteen. The water inside tasted faintly of gun oil, but wet was wet. Through a tear in the canvas, I watched the valley recede, flames fading, tracer arcs dwindling, until the night swallowed all color. Snowflakes streaked past like sparks from some monstrous grinder. The men around me fell silent, heads bobbing, rifle muzzles resting on scuffed boots. Only the engine talked now, a steady monotone promising south, warmth, maybe someday home. But I knew the gauntlet wasn't done. Miles yet to Kotori, more ridges, more ambush points waiting like jaws. I tightened scarf around numb ears, checked that bugle still hung at my belt. Maybe Malloy was right. Maybe a blast of wrong color music at the right second could stall a charge, buy a moment for ammo resupply, for life. The truck bounced, headlights cutting a curve into new darkness. In that brief flare, I saw the next stretch of road, narrow, steep, flanked by pines that leaned in like spectators eager for the show. My stomach sank, but I chambered a fresh round, slid mittens tighter on the stock. The convoy rumbled on, engines echoing against granite walls, and somewhere ahead, carried on the wind, faint yet unmistakable, bugles answered, daring us to keep coming. The pines closed in, trunks whipping past under the truck's hood like black bars on a film reel. Each bend felt tighter than the last, wheels skidding over glaze that looked harmless until the back end slewed and the driver fought to hold the line. Another burst of tracers sliced from the left bank, bright green stitching across the road, sparks showering the tailgate. The gunner on the 50 barked short replies, links rattling through the feed in a furious metallic hiss. Empty casings hammered the roof of our canvas, clanged off helmets, tinkled into the icy ruts we just left behind. Somewhere up the column a horn blared 3 long notes, signal to halt. Brakes shrieked, the convoy accordion to a stop, engines idling rough. I jumped down, boots sliding in churned slush that stank of diesel and cordite. Malloy was already in the road, carbine raised, pointing to a rocky saddle where the slope pinched the trail to the width of a billiard cue. Chinese satchel charges had punched a cavity under the surface, a wedge of asphalt now tilted like a trap door, half the lane hanging over black void. A truck lay on its side below, canvas torn, wheels still spinning, slow creaks. Stern. We patch it or we die here, Malloy snapped. His breath shot plumes that drifted toward the trees like smoke signals. Peña's platoon spilled out with shovels, pickaxes, corrugated steel planks scavenged off wrecks. We formed a chain, passing rocks, ammo boxes, even frozen rice sacks from a captured dump, anything to fill that chasm. Hendershot crouched beside me, wedging timber under a plank while bullets cracked overhead. Each time the 50 unleashed above us, the recoil thudded through my boots like distant drums. 20 minutes of frantic work, hands blood raw inside wool, and the makeshift bridge sat level enough for wheels. Malloy waved the lead jeep forward. Its chains clacked across with a "guh" groan but held. The first 6x followed, suspension "guh" whining. We cheered when it cleared, then scrambled back to our own truck. As we climbed aboard, Lanigan "guh" yelled, pointed skyward, parachutes faint in the overcast, drifting our way. We craned necks, praying for ammo, chocolate, anything that fired. Instead, green cylinders thumped into the snow. Mortar rounds. Not ours. Enemy gunners had judged our halt and timed a drop. The first shell hit short but close, throwing up a white geyser, peppered with stone shrapnel. Men dove behind wheels, under chassis. The second exploded on the road's far shoulder, rocking the truck so hard the canvas bowed inward. I tasted grit and diesel, ears ringing high. The driver slammed first gear and floored it, trusting the timber bridge without looking. We lurched across. Planks creaking flexed, snapping, snapped, but the wheels found purchase. I held fast to the side rail, teeth clamped until the rig jolted back on solid gravel. Behind us, another shell found the bridge, crashing, splintering it in a bloom of flame and splattered ice, closing the door on whatever followed. We rattled south through the night, over switchbacks that stacked like stair treads along sheer drop-offs. The wind screamed up from the reservoir basin, knifing through every stitch of clothing, setting canvas to flap a drumbeat that poked rhythm into our nerves. Hendershot finally broke silence, voice ghostly under the engine. "Ammo check!" Hands reached into pockets, bandoliers. Answers came back grim. 3 clips, 2, 1 partial. Morales patted the BAR belt slung over his shoulder and Forrest laughed without humor. Weary. "I'm down to 5 bursts, brothers." We nodded, somber, unspoken pact forming. Single fire only, every round a paycheck. Near dawn, orange lamps glowed ahead. Hagaru Ri. The perimeter appeared like a stubborn candle in a frozen cave. Trenches ringed by scraggly wire, heavy machine guns dug into snow berms. Faint outlines of Quonset huts huddled together. MPs guided us through a gap. Faces wrapped in scarves, eyes cracked and red. Our truck chugged to a halt inside the ring. The tailgate dropped and we stumbled onto hard-packed ground already pocked by shell holes. Corpsmen hurried to unload stretchers, boots squeaking on hoarfrost. For the next hour we became labor again, restacking crates, distributing sea ration sleeves, helping ordnance crews hump boxes of 30-06 and belted 50 to firing pits. Fresh ammo at last, though fresh meant loose rounds tossed in burlap, some corroded green where sea air from Humnam had licked them weeks before. We wiped each one against wool socks, trusting the Garans not to mind a little rust. When tasks paused, I drifted to an aid tent, lit by a single kerosene lantern. Reese lay inside, face drained, lips cracked. Bandages wrapped the stumps where boots once were. I squeezed his wrist. His eyes opened, fireplace embers behind half-mast lids. Weakly, "Keep theirs louder than ours," he whispered, voice thin. I nodded, throat tight. A nurse bustled in, checked the IV, urged me out. Too many men waiting for cots. Night settled again, quick as dropping a shutter. Chinese horns probed the darkness, but they attacked only in small raids, testing wire, tossing sporadic mortar rounds that whumped like fists into pillows. We stood to every time, rifles leveled, but mostly we waited. The cold felt thicker inside the static trench than out on the move. It seeped up through soles, numbed calves, climbed the spine like an ice serpent. To stay awake, we slapped chests, recited baseball lineups, cursed old girlfriends. Conversation always circled back to the breakout order rumored for dawn. Punch one last corridor to Kotori, meet the first of the 11th Marines, then all the way down to Hungnam and the sea. Malloy confirmed it just before gray light. Brief, matter-of-fact, commanding, "We hit the road at 06. Bayonets fixed, rifles on semi. When I blow the whistle, nobody stops for bodies, enemy or ours. Clear?" We answered with the quiet you give a sergeant when there's nothing left to argue. Sleep came in ragged scraps, stolen 10 minutes at a time between stand-tos. I dreamed of San Diego beaches, warm tar sizzling under flip-flops, gulls shrieking overhead. Then awoke to bugles instead of gulls, and snow instead of sand. My fingers had locked around the stock in sleep. It took effort to peel them loose, joints creaking like rusted hinges. 06. Flares popped, colorless in dawn's flat light. The column formed at the south gate, tank dozers up front, blades down to push wrecks and snowdrifts, then half-tracks bristling with Brownings, then our infantry squads marching beside trucks packed with wounded. I found my place next to Hendershot, bayonet gleaming blue steel under a sky the color of lead. Lanigan tightened his helmet strap until it cut a line across his chin. Morales swung the BAR into low carry and muttered a prayer in Spanish, something about iron bones, wooden hearts. Malloy climbed onto a snowbank, whistle between lips. Behind him the mountain highway curved away, a pale ribbon framed by pines bent with ice. Somewhere out there, Chinese regiments blocked every switchback, dug guns into every cut. We could almost feel their eyes, hear their breaths fogging in wait. Malloy's arm rose. The valley held its breath. Wind pausing, motors idling. Bugles distant, but silent for once. The whistle shrilled, a thin, piercing note, and we stepped forward as one, boots snapping snow crust, steel clinking like distant bells. Engines roared behind us. Diesel throttles opened wide. The breakout had begun. 50 yards past the wire, the first shots cracked, single snipers probing. We kept pacing, rifles low, waiting for the volley. It came at a bend where the road pinched. A sheet of fire from both slopes, rifles, light machine guns, grenades rolling down like iron hail. The tank dozers answered with Coke's 30s, treads squealing as they pivoted, blades chewing into drifts and showering sparks off hidden boulders. Malloy blew 3 sharp blasts, charge, and our line surged to double time, boots slapping, bayonets catching pale sun. We hit the left bank first. Hendershot vaulted a fallen log, plunged uphill, with me a step behind. The snow was waist deep, each stride a lunge through powdered cement. Chinese riflemen popped up from spider holes, eyes widening at the steel tips coming. I jabbed, felt the shock travel the length of the rifle as blade met parka, ribs, bone. Yanked free, swung butt to another face, teeth cracking under walnut stock. Shots sounded inches away, snow puffing at my ankles. I fired from the hip, felt the Garand buck, muzzle flash blinding in daylight. Somewhere to my right, Morales unleashed the BAR, a roar that seemed too big for one man. It chopped the ridge like a scythe, brass spraying, belt slithering over his forearm. When it clicked empty, he drew his .45, kept climbing, shouting Spanish curses that steamed the air. Lanigan lobbed grenades over a lip of shale. The detonations thumped the ground under our boots and set clumps of snow tumbling like miniature avalanches. Within minutes, the first blockade broke, defenders melting into timber. We regrouped on the crest, lungs burning, steam rising from packs. Below us, the convoy poured through the gap, trucks in second gear, wounded waving weak salutes as they rolled by. Pena barked for us to fall back to the column, but ahead another bend waited, narrower, steeper, smoke already drifting where enemy mortars marked their next stand. We scrambled down, snow giving way to icy scree that rattled under heels. Hendershot slid, caught himself, then glanced at me with a grin more feral than joyous. "One ridge at a time, buddy." I smacked his shoulder, felt the tremor in my own arm, fatigue layered over adrenaline, but we kept pace. As we reached the roadbed, a shell landed under the lead half-track, flipping it like a toy. Fireball whooshed, diesel tanks rupturing, flames crawling across slush. Wounded crawled clear, uniforms smoking. Tank dozer swerved, tracks chewing asphalt, pushing the wreck sideways until it toppled off the embankment in a roar of collapsing ice. Malloy shouted, voice hoarse but firm, "Keep moving! Use the momentum!" We jogged past the smoking ruin, heat licking our frozen faces, the taste of burning rubber mixed with pine sap and blood, an odor so sharp it stamped itself forever into memory. Rounds cracked from the pines again, this time staggered, uncertain. Maybe their forward observers hadn't caught up. We fired controlled pairs, conserving what little we'd scraped from Hagaru. Each trigger squeeze deliberate, each target chosen. The convoy kept crawling, tires squelching through half-melted slush that refroze the instant chains passed. Behind us, the ridge we'd cleared erupted in fresh firefights, rear guard handling pursuers. Mortar smoke plumed against the skyline, gray looping into darker clouds moving in from the Yellow Sea. Snow recommenced, thick flakes this time, visibility dropping to a white curtain that muffled every echo. Motors sounded distant, as if underwater. Men became gray shapes, trudging, bayonets jutting like quills. I glanced at my rifle, blade edge crusted brown, barrel steaming. My last clip sat heavy in the breech. 7 rounds left. I felt light, almost buoyant, as if every spent cartridge shaved weight off soul and body alike. The snow lifted enough to reveal another switchback, horizon just beyond. Morales jogged up, breath ragged. "Hear that?" I listened, nothing at first, then a faint pulse like surf. Not wind, not engines, a deeper, endless rush. Hendershot whispered, "The sea." Honam lay somewhere past those ridges, ships waiting, boilers lit, decks clear. But between us and that promise stretched miles of ice road, low ammo, and enemy battalions who hadn't yet played their final hand. Malloy signaled halt, scanning the slope ahead where fresh fortifications scarred the white. Sandbagged pits, logs, trenches, zigzagging like stitched wounds. He turned, met our eyes one by one, lips a thin line. His whistle lifted to his mouth, trembling with the same cold that shook us all. We tightened helmet straps, checked bayonets locked firm, counted remaining rounds by touch alone. Diesel engines idled behind, breaths of iron beasts eager to leap. Bugles echoed through the falling snow again, taunting, insistent, calling for one more dance on the frozen stage. Malloy's cheeks puffed once, twice, the whistle screeched. We lunged forward into the stinging white, rifles braced, boots hammering brittle crust, charging the last barricade between mountain misery and the salt smell of salvation. Snow blurred into streaks as I sprinted. Each stride punching through crust that shattered like sugar glass. Frost-stiff branches slapped my helmet, showering ice crystals down my collar. Ahead, Morales fired the bar from the hip, 3 round taps, guiding our rush toward a gap in the timber where enemy trenches split the slope. I lowered my bayonet, strained breath clawing at ribs, and crashed over the lip. The trench smelled of damp straw and cordite. A Chinese soldier swung his rifle like a club. I ducked, thrust low, felt steel scrape bone, yanked free, slipped on blood-slick boards. Hendershot vaulted beside me, butt-stroking another defender before the man's hand could pull a grenade pin. Lanigan tossed his last frag down a log-roofed bunker. The blast punched a warm gust up the trench, scattering sparks that died mid-air in the cold. Malloy's whistle screeched, "Rally on the road!" We scrambled out, snowbanks collapsing under our weight. Engines below roared in low gear, exhaust plumes drifting blue across the switchback. Drivers gunned throttles the instant we reappeared, steel teeth and treads biting ice like predators, tasting blood. I hooked a hand on a tailgate, boots skidding until Hendershot dragged me aboard. The convoy rolled, faster now, 15, maybe 20 miles an hour, too quick for foot shadows to keep pace. But the hills hadn't emptied. Shapes flitted between tree trunks, firing blind, rounds pinging side panels like hail on tin roofs. The 50 on our truck hammered short bursts, thud, thud, thud. Muzzle flash bright enough to paint the snow pink. Empty links rattled over canvas, jingling into the drift like sleigh bells for the dam.
2 bends later, the valley opened and the world changed color. The horizon glowed faint turquoise where mountains met coastal plain. I tasted salt in the wind, light but real. "Sea breeze," Morales croaked, half laugh, half sob. We might as well have tasted freedom. Then the ridge above erupted. Enemy mortars bracketed the road, shells walking toward the lead tank dozer. The first blast slewed it sideways. The second stove the blade, stalling the engine in a squeal of stripped gears. Column jammed instant. Malloy jumped down, waving squads left and right to flank the mortar nests before the whole pass bottled. We fanned into gullies, feet crunching through birch undergrowth. I crawled belly low past a frozen creek, rifle balanced on forearms. Mortar tubes sat on a terrace 50 yards up, 2 crews busy. Their spotter scanned downslope, bugle hung at his hip. I sighted on him, pause, exhale, squeeze. The Garand barked, the spotter stiffened, toppled. Hendershot and Lanigan fired together, cutting down one gun team. Morales swept the second tube with BAR fire. Rounds punched snow plumes, men dropped. Mortars silenced. We leapt into their pit, heaved the intact rounds over the edge, slid grappled base plates aside. A last gunner groaned under a tarp. Lanigan pressed 2 fingers to his lips, quiet, then moved on. No more shots traced our column from that ridge. Back on the road, tank mechanics wrangled tow cables around the dozer's hull, chains clanking like prison doors. While they dragged it clear, we hustled down the slope on foot, boots chewing through granular slush churned by hundreds of tires. The trucks crept behind, drivers hunched forward, eyes huge. They had maybe a gallon of courage left apiece, and every ambush siphoned more. The descent twisted through rock corridors, so tight, daylight vanished. Frost-furred stalactites drooped from overhangs, snapping loose when concussion from the 50s jarred the air. One crashed across the hood of our truck, ice exploding like tempered glass, spooking the driver into fishtailing. He regained control, barely. At the canyon mouth, a burned-out convoy choked the route. South Korean transports, caught hours earlier, still smoldering.
Charred tires oozed tar across the track. Malloy sprinted forward, shouting for demolition. Engineers set shaped charges inside husks. We ducked behind boulders as sequential blasts blew twisted steel into ravines, clearing a lane just wide enough for single-file passage. Twilight bled in while we waited our turn. I glanced at my ammo. 3 rounds in the rifle, 1 clip loose in pocket, bayonet nicked along the edge. I could feel the line between mere fatigue and collapse thinning, a frayed rope over ice water. Hendershot hummed again, barely audible. I found myself matching his rhythm. Inhale, exhale. Keep standing. Finally, our truck crawled through the gap, chassis groaning. Beyond, the land leveled, mountains falling behind like closing gates. Stars emerged, quivering in brittle air. Ahead, distant lights flickered. Hung Nam. Naval guns boomed offshore, red strobes against cloud bottoms. Each concussion rolled inland like thunder dragged by chains. We debarked at an outer defense ring, a ragged grid of trenches lit by barrel fires. MPs waved traffic toward the beachhead, while shore batteries lobbed illumination rounds overhead. Artificial moons dangling on wire parachutes. Snowflakes glowed amber in their descent, then vanished into black surf. Malloy herded us toward a supply dump stacked with crates. We tore them open, Garand clips, carbine mags, cartons of Lucky Strikes. I loaded trembling fingers with fresh brass, the warm smell of cosmoline almost narcotic after 2 days of burnt powder. Pocketed 2 packs of cigarettes, lit one from a barrel flame, sucked smoke deep. It burned worse than frozen air but steadied my guts. Word spread down the line. Evacuation at first light. LSTs and merchantmen waiting off harbor, destroyers on picket. Until then, we held the perimeter. Simple as that. We dug fresh foxholes in gritty shoreline sand, bayonets doubling as shovels. The sea hissed nearby, waves slapping ice floes with lazy indifference to our war. Midnight approached. Firing outside the wire ebbed. Enemy patrols probing but keeping distance. Navy star shells made sneaking close a fool's errand. In lulls, I heard ship engines thrum offshore, deep bass notes promising steel decks, hot coffee, sheets. Reese would already be somewhere out there, legs bandaged, maybe dreaming of jukebox swing. I leaned on my rifle, watching phosphorescence spark under each wave crest, ghost fire twinned to the tracer arcs that had lit the mountain nights. The contrast felt obscene and comforting. Just after 0300, a massive explosion rocked the harbor, dazzling white flash. We ducked, ears ringing. A fuel dump up pier had taken a direct hit. Either enemy shelling or demolition gone wrong. Flames whooshed skyward, reflecting off low clouds, turning snowbanks tangerine. The blast wave rattled teeth, spun sparks through the air like swarming fireflies. "Hold your positions," Malloy shouted, though no one looked eager to run toward the inferno. Secondary blasts rippled a chain of ammo sheds cooking off, each bang slapping the shoreline, spraying chunks of burning crate that arced into dark water with sizzling hisses. For 10 minutes, the night was all fire and echo. Then the flames subsided to a giant bonfire licking the wreckage of a pier. In that garish light, we saw Chinese patrol boats offshore, small silhouettes darting beyond destroyer searchlights, trying to slip torpedoes in among the transports. Naval 5-inchers coughed, blue flashes bearing their gun crews. Water columns geysered around the intruders until they wheeled away, engines sputtering. Overhead, corsairs finally arrived, their gull wings ghostly white under flares. They dove, rockets streaking. Distant impacts thundered like avalanches across the inlet. By 04:30, the horizon paled. A cold mist rose off the sea, carrying diesel scent, cordite, burned rice stores from the ruined pier. Orders came down, load out. Wounded first, walking survivors next, heavy weapons last. We fell into file along a boardwalk slick with frost. Sailors in blue deck jackets guided us onto LST 845, hull plates icy, ramps creaking. I stepped onto steel, boots ringing hollow. The deck smelled of paint, salt, coffee brewing somewhere below. Sailors pressed tin cups into raw hands, thick black joe, so hot it scalded tongue, blissful. I gulped half, felt life bloom in chilled marrow. More Marines shuffled aboard, ghost figures, eyes sunken, faces half-masked by frost mustaches. Some clutched souvenirs, captured bugles, a Japanese bayonet, a Chinese banner of red silk stiff with ice. I realized mine still hung at my belt. I raised it to my lips and blew a single note, low, wavering. The sound barely reached 20 feet, lost in engine noise and gull cries, yet heads turned, smiles flickered. Hendershot laughed, a short bark. "Wrong key, jarhead." The ramp groaned. Chains clattered, winches hauling steel door shut. Dock cleats released. Lines splashed into water. Engines clutched ahead. Vibration hummed through deck plates, into boot soles, into spine, into skull. I watched shoreline recede, piles of abandoned gear, barrels of fuel with charges wired, exhaustion fires still glowing. On the distant snow ridge, a lone figure stood, silhouetted. Perhaps enemy scout, perhaps last of our outposts, raising binoculars as if to memorize our exit. Destroyers opened counter battery one last time, star shells climbing above mountains we'd bled across. Their glow washed the harbor in harsh daylight for a heartbeat, then winked out. I set my cup down, leaned against the gunwale, and let the hum of turbines drown the phantom bugles, echoing still inside my ears. The ship's prow turned southeast, slicing gray swells, drawing a straight line between memory and tomorrow, leaving behind a frozen road littered with brass, footprints, ghosts. The wind off the Sea of Japan was cold, but it smelled of life, not death, and for the first time in weeks the cold felt bearable. I closed my eyes and felt the deck rise and fall beneath me, rhythm steady, certain, carrying us toward warmer waters and home, wherever that might be now. Salt spray cut across the deck, spitting fine needles that froze the moment they touched parka cloth. I leaned into the rail anyway, letting the waves hiss wash the smell of burnt fuel from my nostrils. The LST lumbered southward, bow plates thudding each swell like a boxer's fists against a heavy bag. Every jolt rattled the Garand clips still clamped to my belt, empty brass I'd pocketed without thinking, as if the rifle wanted to remind me I'd made it out with only memories for ammunition. Behind me, the superstructure throbbed with engine vibration, a steady bass line you felt more than heard. It blended with murmurs from the card game three men tried to keep going under a tarp, cigarette tips glowing through wind-whipped folds. Hendershot crouched among them, one glove off so he could flip dog-eared cards, the frost on his beard melting in tiny rivulets down his chin. Now and then he'd glance at me, as though to check I was still fixed to the horizon rather than tipping into the green swells below. I could read the question in his eyes, thoughtful. "You good, buddy?" I'd give the smallest nod because talking took breath I wanted to save. The bugle I'd liberated from the ridge lay propped against my boot, brass dulled now by salt. I thought about tossing it overboard, send those echoes down where even ghosts can't follow. But my fingers kept tracing its dents, remembering the last thin note that slipped out. Symbols matter when sense fails. By dusk, the coastline of Korea etched itself against low cloud, dark hills, no snow this far south, patches of brown earth showing through rice paddies left fallow. We curved around a promontory where a lighthouse winked somber yellow. The smell of the sea changed, less clean salt, more tidal mud, rotted kelp. The ship slowed, engines reversing, deck shuddering as anchors dropped. Officers shouted over wind, sailors rigged gangways and vehicle ramps, cables groaning through winches. Tugs with chipped paint nosed alongside, tossing lines that slapped water like wet ropes on a barn floor. The order came to debark. We slung packs that felt somehow heavier after a day's rest, rifles cradled at high port. Descending the ramp, boots clanged, then sank ankle-deep in harbor silt, rutted by truck tires. I recognized that smell. Pusan docks, mixture of coal smoke, fish guts, diesel-soaked planks. Last time we'd loaded here, shivering in June drizzle before Wonsan. 6 months had aged the place. Warehouses bore fresh mortar scars. Evacuees crowded the wharf, faces gaunt behind scarves. Some waved feebly as we filed past, unsure whether we were defenders or more refugees. Trucks waited beyond the rail yard, deuce and a halfs whose canvas still showed ash from earlier convoys. We climbed in, benches creaking. I wedged between Hendershot and Lanigan, BAR magazines clacking as men settled. The driver, a corporal with patchy stubble, shouted that the Rock Army held a line 20 kilometers north. We'd bivouac short of it for refit. He ground gears, and the convoy rattled through bitter twilight, headlights hooded, engines straining uphill. Snowflakes, the size of fingernails, began to fall again, drifting through gaps in the canvas. They melted on warm rifle steel, releasing faint hisses, as though the guns themselves sighed. Hendershot dozed, chin to chest, fingers still clasped round the lucky deck of cards. Morales sat opposite, eyes open, humming the riff from Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, one hand tapping an invisible trumpet. I pulled the real bugle from my belt, weighed it. Its mouthpiece was ice cold, lip metal dented where some enemy teeth must have clamped it once. Without thinking, I raised it in both hands, studied the sky through its bell, fading amber clouds, a lone evening star. In that circle, I saw frosted ridges, falling comrades, the muzzle flash that ended a scream, melted them into the distant darkness behind us. A smell of hot soup wafted through the truck, field kitchen up ahead. We dismounted in a muddy yard lit by barrel fires. Supply crates formed makeshift tables, steam curled from galvanized cans of beef stew. I spooned chunks of carrot and sinew into a mess tin, tongue burning for the first real heat since Chosin. The broth coated throat and stomach with a lazy warmth that threatened to drop eyelids right there in the mud. But orders never sleep. Weapons to clean, socks to dry, feet to check before blisters turned septic. A drafty warehouse, we peeled layers beside glowing pot-bellied stoves. Rifles stripped down, bolts wiped free of congealed grease, boar snakes hissing through barrels. I rubbed the Garen's walnut stock, where bayonet thrusts had left fresh nicks, oil seeping into the scars like salve. Hendershot produced a stub of candle, let wax drip on his cracked trigger finger, sealing splits the way old hunters do. He grinned at my raised eyebrow. Marine hot wax treatment, cheaper than a beauty parlor.
Lights out came at 2300. We rolled in blankets still damp at the edges, bodies aching in ways battle never explained, pain deep in sinew where fear and ice had gnawed. Outside, trucks, downshifting, convoys bound for the front even now. Somewhere a diesel horn, moan long and low, like a memory of those bugles, but spun to a different purpose, summoning reinforcements, not attacks. Sleep arrived slow, a tide nosing over wreckage of thought. Reese, laughing, during basic. Harris, bragging about his brother's home runs. The chaplain's, solemn, voice stripping meaning to simple rituals. I dreamed of home, Mom's porch light glowing against summer moths, and woke startled to find the glow was only a guard's flashlight sweeping rafters. 3 days we stayed in that shivering depot, doctoring feet, swapping frozen boots for new, drawing fresh ammo that clinked like promise. There were rumors, maybe rotation to Japan, maybe back to Masan for reserve, maybe, if stars aligned, a liberty pass to a bathhouse where water actually steamed. Skeptical, no one believed any of it. A grizzled gunny, gruffly, said the Chinese would push again come New Year, and every rifle would be needed. His certainty settled like a lead blanket, but felt honest, and honesty carried its own comfort. On the morning we moved out, a brittle sun crested the ridge, catching the frost on our helmets so they glittered like tin halos. Trucks lined the road, smoke, exhaust, clamoring, as endless as the white ribbon we'd left behind. I climbed aboard, M1 warm from the oil I'd rubbed in, the bugle tucked inside my pack this time, out of sight, but not out of reach. The engine roared, gears engaged with that deep, mechanical clank you feel in your spine. As the tires rolled, I stared at the receding docks,
the cranes frozen in mid-lift like praying mantises, the wide gray water beyond. Somewhere out there, frozen and silent under drifting snow, lay the reservoir, abandoned foxholes, the voices we couldn't carry with us. I felt the loss tug, then slacken as the truck picked speed, because the road ahead demanded eyes forward. Hendershot tapped my elbow, pointed to the sky. A skein of geese arrowed south, wings steady, no hesitation. He raised both eyebrows, inquiring, "Follow the leader, huh?" I smiled, first real smile in weeks, and tapped my helmet brim in salute. The convoy crested a hill, sunlight flaring off rifle bolts like tiny heliographs, signaling unknown receivers. The sea disappeared behind folds of land, taking the last taste of salt with it. In its place came the familiar rasp of cold wind, the smell of pine drifting from higher ridges, and the metallic promise of more marches, more nights where every heartbeat pounded in sync with the rattling clips on an M1. Yet under it all, I felt a new thread, faint but steady. The deck tremor of that ship still thrumming in bones, reminding that roads can lead away as surely as they lead toward. I pulled my scarf up, settled back against the tailgate, and let the rattle of chains and crunch of tires write the next beat in a story still unfolding. One stride, one round, one breath at a time, toward whatever waited beyond the next frozen hill. Snow hid the distant ridgeline in a soft haze, but the wind carried its shape anyhow, an invisible knife pressing against my cheek as we rolled along the valley road. The convoy had settled into its rhythm again. Engines droning, chains slapping fenders, rifle bolts rattling whenever the truck hit a rut. We were bound west now, skirting the southern foothills where the front had gone fluid. No one sure who held which rice paddy after each night's patrols. The rumor mill said we'd relieve a regimental combat team, thin on bodies, or maybe build blocking positions while the division licked wounds. Either way, the direction pointed us back toward gunfire rather than the ships. The air tasted different this far from the reservoir, less metallic, more earthy, with hints of turned soil and burning bamboo from farmsteads the war had trampled. Brown stubble poked through frosted paddies, and ox cart tracks intersected the mud ruts our tires carved. Villagers watched us pass, faces expressionless, arms bundled inside quilted coats. No cheers, no stones, just those dark eyes tracking one more wave of armed ghosts rolling through their lives. We halted outside a hamlet bisected by a creek sluggish with thin ice. Engineers had cobbled a Bailey bridge there, steel panels gleaming wet in the wan sun. Malloy hopped off the lead jeep and paced along the embankment, boots crunching dead reeds. He waved the first truck across, tested each wheel's passage with a squint, then signaled the rest. Our driver feathered the throttle, and the truck clattered over metal grating, water slapping beams below. On the far side, a battered signboard leaned against a willow stump, hand-painted Hangul faded almost white. Harris would have translated if he'd been here. I imagined it had once promised rice yields or market days, nothing about armies crossing. Past the village, the road climbed into low hills patched with pine scrub and blackened shell craters. Night came early in those folds, and when the sun slid behind the crest, we found ourselves crawling through a twilight world, lit only by the dull glow of exhaust embers. The driver pulled over at a crossroads marked by a stone marker cracked in half. Word filtered down. Bivouac on this ridge until dawn. Scouts needed daylight to plot the next leg. We debarked into knee-deep grass, coated with frost needles that snapped under weight like brittle bones. Supply had issued fresh tents, canvas so stiff it felt sprung with wire. Setting them in darkness became a comedy of tangled poles and muffled curses. Eventually, we coaxed a bell-shaped upright and crawled inside. 4 of us packed tight, shoulders bumping like beans in a ration tin, small stove at the center, spitting blue flames from a chunk of hexamine. The heat rose fast, fogging the canvas, but if you leaned an elbow against the wall, it felt like touching the moon. Hendershot produced a battered harmonica from his parka pocket. Miracle it hadn't frozen solid or taken shrapnel. He warmed it over the stove, then loosed a few tentative notes, shaky at first, settling into a slow blues line that wound around the hiss of the burner. The melody filled the tent like smoke, curling around our thoughts. Morales tapped the bar's sling buckle to keep time. Lanigan hummed a bass drone. I closed my eyes and let the tune stitch its way through memories. The crunch of frost under boots on Tuktong Pass. The hiss of bugles in thin air. Reese's quiet grip before the stretcher team lifted him away. Each note seemed to thread those moments into something almost bearable. When the stove tablet burned out, we plunged back into cold. Breath plumes met in the dark like ghost fists bumping. We burrowed into blankets, boots lined around the stove base so any lingering heat might dry them by morning. Sleep came ragged again, bursts of exhaustion punctured by flashes of the fight. I jolted awake more than once, hand on rifle, until the hiss of wind convinced me no one was charging. A gray dawn trumpet. No bugle this time, just a corporal banging on tent flaps, pulled us from blankets. Outside, the hills glowed faint rose as first light seeped under cloud. Breakfast arrived in insulated cans, powdered eggs, congealed to rubber, and bread so hard it could stop a .45. We ate anyway, chewing warmth into jaws. Malloy gathered squads in a meadow rimed with hoarfrost and briefed the day's march. 12 clicks to a ridgeline overlooking a rail junction. Dig in, hold. Simple on paper. We moved out, legs still thick with sleep, rifles slung at port in case partisan snipers lined the paddies. A lone farmhouse smoldered in the distance, smoke coiled slowly, unfurling the scent of wet straw and soot. No figures stirred among the collapsed rafters, just 3 chickens pecking at ash, oblivious to kingdoms trading hands beyond their coop. Mid-morning, the column hit a stretch where the track ran parallel to an abandoned rail spur. Rusted tank cars lay on their sides, wheels torn off by demolition charges months earlier. Inside one car, a tangle of ice-glazed vines clung to broken beams. Nature already reclaiming war's leftovers. Hendershot climbed onto a coupler frame, peered through a bullet-chewed side panel, and laughed. He tossed down a wooden crate labeled Peaches, California, 1944, still sealed. We pried the lid and found jars of syrup-packed fruit, miraculously intact. Morales smashed the top off one and gulped thick, sweet slices until syrup dribbled down his chin. I scooped handfuls into my canteen cup, savoring sugar that tasted half illegal. The sugar rush faded by noon, when clouds thickened and the road began its final pitch toward our designated ridge. Frozen mud slicked the ascent. Every few yards, a truck spun chains until drivers wedged planks under wheels. We infantry climbed the shoulder, bayonets scraping sporadic sparks off granite. Near the crest, scouts signaled halt. Enemy sign ahead. Malloy sent Lanigan and me forward to eyeball. We crawled the last 100 meters, elbows digging frozen turf. The ridge top flattened into a narrow shelf, then dropped into a bowl where the rail junction sprawled. Switchyard torn by craters, switch stands twisted. But tucked against a wooded spur sat a cluster of fresh dugouts, rectangular berms of dark earth that hadn't yet crusted in the freeze. Smoke wisps rose, tiny threads, but there. Through binoculars, I counted maybe 30 fighting positions, orderly lines of stacked logs, firing slits facing our approach. Chinese, no doubt. We slid back and delivered the news. Malloy nodded grim. "No time for flanking games," he said. "We dig in on this shoulder. Keep them pinned so the regiment can swing south and punch their supplies." He laid companies on a semicircle across the slope, machine guns covering the bowl. Ammo detail ran crates along the line. Full clips thudded into fighting holes like gifts. I took position behind a fallen pine trunk, roots clawing the air like talons. The Garan's barrel rested across a notch I'd carved with bayonet. The pine pitch smelled bright, almost citrus against the gun oil. Hendershot settled next to me, harmonica tucked back inside jacket, where it pinged faintly each time he breathed. The first exchange wasn't bugles this time, just a single rifle pop from their side. Then a second, testing. Our guns replied in measured pairs. Snow kicked off enemy berms, and I saw helmets duck, bobbing. They returned with a burst of burp gun chatter, bullets whining over our log. So began an afternoon duel. Slow, economical, each side conserving, as though both banks sat at the same red line on the ledger. Between volleys, I caught glimpses of their trenchbacks, saw a young soldier wiping frost from his glasses, another coaxing a tiny stove under a kettle. Thoughtful. It struck me how similar the tableau looked to ours. Different uniforms, same hunger, same cold, gnawing bones. Late day, clouds parted just enough for a thin sunblade to spotlight the bowl, glinting on rifle bolts. Malloy used the glare. He signaled mortar crews. 4 tubes thumped in quick succession. The first bombs bracketed short. The next dropped amid their center line, geysers of snow and dirt tossing men like cloth dolls. A moment later, Chinese bugles finally wailed, a sharp call to reposition. Their line sagged, then folded back into the woodline. We held fire, wary of ruse, but scouts soon confirmed withdrawal deeper into hills. Relieved. Objective secured, at least for now. As dusk fell, silence settled heavy, broken only by occasional crack of a branch under retreating feet. We exhaled long-held breaths, shoulders slumping. Morales crawled down the line, passing a can of those rescued peaches, syrup half crystallized. We shared slow spoonfuls, cold sweetness coating tongues, while the sky shifted from pewter to bruised plum. Stars pricked through gaps in cloud, first clear tableau since before the reservoir. I leaned against the pine trunk and watched them emerge, constellations flickering like distant campfire. In that quiet, the war felt momentarily small, as though we hovered outside time itself. Hendershot unslung the harmonica, pressed it to chapped lips, and this time the tune came gentle, almost playful, the opening bars of Home on the Range, notes drifting into the crisp night. I laughed under my breath. It sounded absurd here, yet comforting. Morales hummed harmony. Even Malloy, pacing behind the line, paused, chin lifting toward the sound. When the last note faded, I lifted the bugle from my pack. I hesitated, memories of its harsher calls echoing across snow, but then placed the mouthpiece lightly against frost-burned lips. Instead of a battle signal, I blew a simple, low reveille. Slow, stretched. The kind that's more farewell than wake up. The tone rolled down the slope, bounced off empty dugouts, and dissolved into pine shadows. No answering horn rose. Just the hush of wind threading branches, and the creak of trucks miles back, shifting in the cold. I lowered the horn. For the first time since Kotori, I felt the reservoir's grip loosen. A hand unclenching from around my chest. Tomorrow the ridge might explode again, bugles could return, ammo could run dry. But in that brief pocket of starlight, with peaches on my tongue, and music still trembling in the air, it was enough that we'd made it this far. I settled deeper against the log, wrapped scarf over nose, and let the sky fill my eyes until outlines blurred. Behind my lids, mountains flashed, convoys thundered, frozen nights cracked with rifle fire. Yet over everything ran a softer thread, an unbroken hum like the engine of a ship cutting through dark water, carrying us forward, always forward, toward a dawn not yet named. The night draped the ridge in velvet so deep I could taste it. Cold, dry, faintly metallic, like sucking on a spent casing. A thin crescent moon offered barely enough glow to outline the rail yard ruins below, heaps of twisted track gleaming when clouds parted. We kept low behind our pine log breastwork, rifles bristling like porcupine quills across the frozen slope. Wind had died, leaving a hush that felt staged, as if someone off-screen held a finger to his lips, waiting for the cue. Around 0200, the hush cracked. A single mortar round whooped into the bowl. White flash, snow plume, followed by a second, then a ripple that walked methodically toward our line. Concussion thudded through the log wall, showering bark chips over coats already powdered white. I hugged the stock, teeth jolting, eardrums fluttering in the vacuum between blasts. Over the cough of explosions, I caught Malloy's rasp down the trench. "Steady. Keep heads down till they lift." The barrage lasted 4 minutes, short enough to label probing, long enough to torment nerves raw. It ended on a dime. Silence rushed back, too sudden. I wiped grit from my eyes, ears ringing. Hendershot tapped my shoulder, pointed downhill. Movement, faint smudges swirling through ground fog. The barrage had kicked up. Then came the sound. Soft crunch of boots on crust, lots of boots, the occasional clink of metal against frozen canteens. No bugles yet. They were trying stealth this time. "Hold fire," Malloy hissed. My finger hovered over the trigger guard. Shapes coalesced within 50 yards, white-smocked figures padding forward, rifles slung muzzle down. Moonlight brushed bayonet tips, little silver fangs. I counted 10, 20, more, spread in a ragged skirmish line edging uphill. Our machine guns waited, barrels tracking like sleepy hounds.
30 yards. The enemy line halted. One figure raised both arms. Something glimmered between hands. A signal lamp? No. A whistle. The shrill tweet ripped the fog. Bugles blared in instantaneous reply, shattering the night like breaking glass. 2, 3, maybe 6 horns screaming, overlapping commands. Chinese rifles snapped up, muzzles spat orange coins. Bullets cracked the logs, bark splintering. Malloy's hand chopped. Our machine guns hammered back, long ripping bursts that carved bright arcs of tracer down the slope. Garands joined, 8-round rhythms stitching muzzle flashes into a strobe. The hillside lit and went dark in frantic pulses. I picked targets through a haze of gun smoke, body on autopilot. Front sight, squeeze, recoil, bolt slam, front sight again. Snow burst around charging boots. Men tumbled, more stepped over. Their line closed womb-tight around our left flank, finding a gap where the slope dipped. Morales swung the BR, shouting cover, fired until belt-end clanked. An incoming round found his left arm, crimson sprayed across his parka. He dropped behind the log, teeth bared, belt jerking from the gun like a severed snake. I yanked him back, wrapped a field dressing, tied a knot that vanished under steaming blood. Stressed. Ammo belts thumped behind us, rear runners tossing fresh boxes over the parapet. Lanigan cracked them open, hands shaking, feeding cartridges into the .30 cal while its barrel hissed snowmelt. Clips grew scarce. I felt for my bandolier. 2 left. Hendershot had 1. He patted pockets as if hoping rounds would spawn. Chinese grenades arced, stick handles silhouetted against stars. We ducked. Snow spouted, logs shuddered. 1 grenade blast shattered the pine buttress 5 feet to my right, flinging a chunk that clipped my helmet and rang like a gong. Disoriented. Ears buzzed, sight tunneled. When focus snapped back, I saw silhouettes vaulting the breach. 3, maybe 4, bayonets gleaming, shark bright.
"Blades!" Pena roared. I rammed mine home with a metallic snap and lunged upward. The first attacker met Hendershot's thrust midair, steel punching his chest so deep the hilt clanged ribs. I ripped free, parried another blade, counter-stabbed low into gut. Hot blood steamed the cold air. The man screamed once, toppled backwards over the log. More scrambled in. Pena fired point blank, M1 bucking, empty clip pinging. He clubbed the next with the stock
bones cracking loud. The log line became a melee of shadows and sparks, steel kissing steel, grunts, grusses, snow crunching under desperate boots. I blocked a downward slash, twisted, rammed my bayonet up through parka and out the shoulder. My opponent's rifle clattered. I shoved him away, pivoted to guard Hendershot's flank. Then, click. Empty. I ejected the spent clip, slapped my next to last into the receiver, bolt-slicing thumb web on the slam. Blood welled hot, instantly cooling. Only 8 rounds between living and dead now. Downslope, Chinese buglers blew a new call, 2 rising notes, 1 long fall. Their forward line disengaged fast, dragging wounded, leaving 2 bodies crooked over the logs. Our Foxhole defenders kept muzzles tracking, but Malloy bellowed, "Cease, conserve!" Firing slowed to sporadic pops, chasing retreating shadows. Silence seeped back, thick with gunpowder and iron-scented steam. I leaned against the log, chest heaving, bayonet tip dripping pink onto snow that hissed as blood pooled, then froze. Hendershot wiped his blade on a fallen smock, eyes wide but steady. Morales groaned behind us, morphine taking hold, his wounded arm bundled like a holiday ham. Malloy crawled over. Ammo? I held up 4 fingers, 1 clip chambered, 3 remaining between us. He grimaced, swung to Pena, got a similar count. Across the ridge the tally echoed, most rifles down to 12 rounds or less. BAR belts empty, machine guns with maybe 5 boxes each. Resupply convoy was still hours out, road south chewing trucks faster than they could load them.
Pena proposed a patrol to scavenge. Malloy shook his head.
They'll be back in strength. No sense thinning the line.
He radioed FDC for mortar illumination to blind a renewed rush, but the handset crackled, dead. Battery frozen. We were on our own until dawn. We worked fast. Stripped bandoliers off the Chinese dead, finding stripper clips of 7.62 useless for our Garens. Their grenades fit, though, porcelain-headed, fuse cords tucked under waxed paper. We pocketed every one. Hendershot found a drum magazine for a burp gun, jingling half full, and stashed it, just in case steel and willpower failed. An hour crawled. Frost crept over rifle stocks, sweat chilled down spines. We rotated watch, 2 pairs scanning, while the rest squatted on haunches to keep blood in feet. Morales drifted in and out, breathing shallow, but color held. He'd live if the line held. At 04:45, the moon slid behind new cloud, leaving darkness thick as coal dust. Snow began falling, tiny grains swirling rather than drifting. Sound muffled, vision blurred beyond 10 yards. Out of that white came the faintest jangle. Metal clicking metal, steady cadence. I strained. It grew louder. Cartridge belts? No. Sleigh bells? The thought flicked absurdly through my head before recognition snapped. Entrenching tools, banging canteens. A marching rhythm masked as harmless noise. Chinese troops were using the blizzard as cover, banging gear to confuse range guess. Smart. Seconds later, wooden clackers started. Random, scattered, echoing until direction vanished. Our own trenches fell silent, each man waiting for sight, but snow erased shapes. Night glasses useless, lenses fogged. My pulse hammered so hard I felt it in tongue. Bugles cut loose, high, triumphant, closer than any before.
The ridge exploded with movement. White shadows surged out of the swirl, racing the wind. Muzzle flashes ripped through the snow haze at arm's length, bright enough to sting eyes. I leveled the Garand, fired blind into mass. Kick, slide, kick, unable to see impacts. Empty. Last clip. Empty rifle now, a club. I swung stock into a helmeted skull, wood cracking. Enemy numbers thinned. Some stumbled, others dove back into snowdrift, crawling out of arc. Gunnery staff raked them until tracers ran out, barrel glowing dull orange. Bugles called retreat, 3 descending notes wavering through wind. Shadows peeled away, swallowed by snowfall, leaving groans and twitching forms behind. We didn't cheer. Too tired. I slumped against the sandbags, lungs burning icy shards. Hendershot leaned beside me, chest heaving, knife dripping onto snow turning gray. Dawn glimmered faint behind thinning cloud, pewter light touching mounds of bodies strewn across the bowl. Our ridge held, but barely. Malloy strode over, face gaunt, eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. He clasped my shoulder, then Hendershot's, silent thanks beyond words. Ammo status? I tapped the empty rifle, wearily. None. Hendershot lifted 3 enemy grenades, grimly. This. Malloy exhaled, looked east down the valley, headlights flickered. A string of trucks grinding up the track, silhouettes of ammo crates stacked high in beds. Relief. He allowed himself a tiny smile. Resupply in 10. But before relief reached us, a new sound rose, distant, low, unmistakable. Artillery rolling thunder from beyond far hills. Enemy guns repositioned, sighting our ridge. Malloy's smile died. Dig deeper, he said. I braced my empty rifle, stared at the horizon glowing with each muzzle flash, and tasted wood smoke drifting from the trucks still a mile out. Fresh rounds so close, steel rain on the way. And we had minutes to brace. The battle wasn't over. Dawn simply opened another chapter. I sank to one knee, jammed bayonet into frozen turf for leverage, and began carving a deeper scrape, chest tight, heart hammering to the rhythm of those distant guns, marching closer, closer, closer. Artillery shells start as rumors on the wind, faint tremors you feel in jawbone before ears catch the actual roll. The first salvo crawled over the ridges like distant freight, then slammed into the far slope with a flat metallic whoomp that made the pine trunks around us shudder. Bark dust drifted. The air tasted suddenly of iron filings. We dove behind what cover we had. Half-crumbled foxholes, fir stumps, the wrecked machine gun shield we'd patched with ammo box lids. "Incoming patterning!" Malloy yelled, voice ripped apart by the next blast. Snow geysered just short of the rail bed, showering ties we'd stacked as a firing step. The enemy guns were walking the rounds up, hundreds of yards with each correction, hunting our line the way a cat toys with string. I jabbed bayonet into permafrost, clawed a deeper slot, boots kicking up shards of frozen root. Hendershot worked beside me, good hand scooping dirt while his other kept the harmonica zipped inside his parka. He said it helped him know the thing was still there, still sealed against all this shrapnel. Morales, arm slung in makeshift brace, used his boots to push loose earth back toward us, cursing every vibration that jarred his wound.
Another shell hit, closer. Air punched out of my lungs, earth jumped, snow hissing as hot fragments vaporized it. Chunk of steel shrieked past so near, I felt its heat through coat sleeves. It slammed into the log behind Peña, splitting it like a ripe melon. Peña blinked, touched the new groove in the wood, then shrugged as though the mountain itself had offered a warning rather than a kill shot. Down the slope, the supply column finally clawed into view. Headlights doused, but you could see the dull glow of cigarette tips in driver cabs, silhouettes hunched to every jolt. First truck fish-tailed on the rutted pass, regained grip, nosed up toward the ridge under shell flashes that lit the bowls strobe bright. They were brave fools, those drivers. No orders could have forced them if their nerves said quit. Malloy waved a red lens, guiding them into reverse defilade behind an earth bank we'd half-blasted during yesterday's lull. The moment the first tailgate slammed down, we sprinted. Heads low, grabbing bandoliers and water-rippled wooden crates stamped Cal Lawn 30 Ball N2 Lot 12-War5. My gloves stuck to frosted brass. I hardly noticed, just cradled the weight like a newborn. Shells kept landing, one so near the truck it rocked on springs, but the Marines in back never stopped passing boxes hand over hand. A chain of frozen shadows moving faster than thought. We flung the crates into shallow scoops along the line, kicked tops in, claws itching to stuff rifles before the enemy spotted that lovely convoy silhouette. One round plowed into the road itself, shattering shale, flipping a truck onto its side. Diesel splashed, steamed under cold drizzle of snow. Flames flickered, but smoke suffocated for lack of oxygen. The cold even starved fire. Two drivers crawled free, faces blackened, eyebrows gone. They stumbled toward cover, and I caught one beneath arms, dragged him behind a berm. The whites of his eyes glowed panic. Pupils darted to each burst like flies. I pressed a canteen to his lips, water slush, but it steadied him long enough to speak. "A few more behind. Don't let him leave the ammo." Then he sank, exhaustion heavier than wounds. Shelling slackened. Either their forward observer lost sight in drifting fog or thought us already shredded. That pause sounded louder than the barrage itself. Our own hearts thumped like kettle drums. "Distribute!" Malloy barked. We tore open clip cartons, brass gleaming. Garin Springs drank the rounds with a hungry shunk-slunk. Bar belts rattled as Lanigan, one hand still bandaged from blocking a bayonet, fed links through the cold, stiff feed cover. I reloaded grenades into my webbing. 4 porcelain tops, 2 pineapples, each fuse cord pre-straightened. The weight felt like sanity. Dawn never truly arrived. Instead, the east brightened enough to turn snow from black to dull pewter. Through that low light, we saw the Chinese infantry massing again across the bowl, silhouettes shuffling into attack blocks, buglers moving to the flanks. Maybe they smelled our fresh ammo. Maybe they just followed timetable, but the horns blew in eerie harmony, notes drifting across the still smoking sled of yesterday's dead. I braced elbows on the rail tie, thumb brushed safety to fire. Resigned. "They don't quit," Hendershot muttered, voice half awe, half dread. I answered by sliding the last clip into my bandolier. Bugles rose, rifles leveled, white figures surged. We waited. 30 yards. 20. Muzzle flashes licking our logworks. Then Malloy's whistle slashed air. Every weapon on our ridge spat flame. The difference full ammunition made felt like turning from candle to floodlight. Garins thumped in near unison. BARs laid sizzling curtains. 30 cals roared with belts long enough to feel luxurious. Enemy lines buckled under volume alone, first rank collapsing before even crossing halfway. I squeezed, recoil slamming familiar bruises into the shoulder, sight picture smearing with every shutter flash. Snow erupted around fallen men, powder hanging like breath before settling into eerie stillness. Yet they kept coming, seconds behind first, climbing bodies as if stepping stones. A squad darted toward our weak right, aiming for that machine gun still jury-rigged after last night's jam. I jerked my rifle right, fired 3, watched tracers stitch their flank. One reached grenade distance, wound coil of fuse showing, until Lanigan's BAR cut him in half, grenade tumbling harmless, fuse sizzling itself to death in snow. The attack lasted 15 minutes by watch, but a lifetime in marrow. When Bugles finally trailed off into discordant wails, the survivors vanished into the trees, leaving ridge white-gray and pocked with black smears where men and gear had fallen. Silence returned, broken only by wounded groans we couldn't reach yet. Malloy signaled cease. Rifles clunked safe, steaming barrels hissed, slapped snow. I flopped to seated position, arms limp rubber. Hendershot sat too, pulled the harmonica but didn't play, just twirled it between glove and frozen fingertips. I knew the tune jammed inside his chest, but even music needs breath, and breath we had none to spare. Pena and Corman crawled out with red crosses shining faint beneath grime, dragging stretchers, collecting our casualties first, then edging downslope to pull Chinese wounded across no man's land. Some enemy tried crawling away. Pena waved them down, hoarse voice croaking, "Lie still, comrade, docs'll patch what can be patched." We had no illusions of exchanging prisoners this far out, but bullet holes looked the same in Mandarin or English. Ammo count came next. I tallied half a bandolier left, 32 rounds, felt like gold bricks. Morales, pale but grinning rough, cradled a fresh BAR belt draped one-armed over neck. Gravelly, 600 reasons to try me, he croaked. We bumped helmets lightly, our version of a hug with rifles still hot. By noon, snow ceased. Sun rolled through thin ice clouds, gilding the ridge in light that stung eyes used to gunpowder gloom. Engineers finally arrived with dozers and satchel chargers, ready to wreck the rail junction so thoroughly not even ghosts could shunt boxcars. We covered them while they wired ties with TNT, stuffing primer cords under every plank. At Malloy's whistle, we ducked. Charges erupted down the line like dominoes of thunder, each blast sending rails whistling skyward, then clanging back, twisted beyond use.
When the last echo faded, silence held a new quality, emptied of strategic worth. This ridge, this bowl of frozen nightmare, now meant nothing to maps. That felt right. Orders crackled on a fresh radio battery. Division, shifting south another 20 miles to consolidate. Relief regiment would screen. We could finally stand down. Packing up meant policing every spent casing, loading survivors into whatever truck still ran, tagging bodies for graves registration. I walked the line one last time, eyes catching on a bent bugle, half buried where its player fell. I nudged it free with boot, slid it into my pack beside the one I'd taken weeks before. Seemed fitting. Trophies from both sides of the same echo. As we marched downhill, the road now littered with sledged rails and shell fragments. The late sun hit our helmets, and I saw the ridge behind glowing gold. Smoke coiled upward, but dissipated quick, as if even the fire knew to move on. At the staging field, trucks idled, radiators steaming like tired horses. Malloy dismissed us by squads to swab rifles and choke down hot chow from field kitchens. I ladled gray beef stew into canteen cup, hand shaking so bad half sloshed out before reaching mouth. Still, it was food. Heavy, real. Behind the mess line, a radio speaker crackled swing music, scratchy with static. Some rear area DJ had patched Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade across the air. The melody drifted over idling engines and groaning suspension. For a second, the ridge, the shells, the blood, all felt thin. A layer you could peel back to a world where couples still danced under warm club lights. Hendershot picked that moment to mouth his harmonica along. Quiet, breath finally steady enough. Notes wove through Miller's brass on the radio, tiny but stubborn. A few Marines started clacking spoons on mess tins in halftime. Someone tapped truck fender like a snare. No laughter, not yet, but I saw lips curve. Men remembering sound that didn't signal death.
Sun set quick, stars pierced the dusk, and cold slid in again gentler for absence of fear. We curled up in truck beds, rifles cradled like children more sleepy than dangerous. As engines revved for the night move south, the convoy lights flickered to life under blackout shields. Tiny cat eyes bobbing away from the ridge now lost behind folds of land. I closed my eyes to the hum of diesel and the faint, tinny harmony of harmonica and radio brass blending. In that music, I felt the guns recede, the bugles fade to distant memory. The road stretch forward under tires toward towns whose names I didn't know yet. Each mile, a small promise that maybe, just maybe, the worst mountains had finally been left behind. Engines droned us south through the night, each truck a dim cocoon of breathing, rattling metal and fitful dreaming. When I dozed, the diesel's vibration fused with the hum of my own bones until it felt like the whole battalion was a single tired beast crawling across Korea. The cold snuck through every canvas flap, but the lack of bugles let it sting less than before. Hendershot's harmonica had gone silent again. He clutched it in sleep like a talisman, thumb rubbing slow circles over dented brass. Just after 0300, headlights winked out one by one, and the convoy rolled to blackout idle. Word passed rear to front. Roadblock ahead, bridge blown, enemy sappers busy on the far bank. Malloy kicked us awake, voice a rasp of gravel and coffee. We spilled from the bed, boots hitting frost-hardened ruts. Stars glared overhead. No moon, just a milky river of light you could almost drink if you stared too long. We advanced on foot, rifles at the ready, following the muffled clang of tank dozer treads already probing the embankment. The river, a wide, sluggish ribbon barely showing between willow shadows, had swallowed what remained of the bridge. Two stone piers jutted like black teeth, charred beams dangling. On the opposite shore, Chinese lanterns bobbed, guards moving lazy patrol arcs. They assumed the current and the gap bought them the night. Our engineers, stubborn devils, whispered quick math. Tide low, water waist deep, current slow enough. They hunched over bundles of ponton panels, sliding them down the bank like sleds. Malloy tapped 4 rifle squads, including ours, to cover the crossing.
Snow dusted the mud, quieted boots, but made footing treacherous. I followed Pena into a shallow gully, dug knees behind a rotted log whose bark peeled at a touch. Across the water, a lone lantern paused. I saw a sentry raise a hand to warm breath, then turn away. We had minutes. Dozer engines revved low, shoving first ponton into the drink. It splashed like a carp, water lapping icy black. Men leapt onto the deck, guiding cables, teeth chattering louder than talk. I couldn't suppress it. The ridiculous thought that we were building a raft ride at a summer carnival. Then a flare arced from enemy side, pale comet bursting overhead, drenching the riverbank in stark white. Shadows jerked to life. Lanterns spun. Shouts cracked across water. "Urgent, open up," Pena hissed. Our rifles barked in concert, tracer tips smacking lantern posts, slicing silhouettes. I fired 3 fast, saw one guard topple backward off the embankment, a splash louder than gunshots. Hendershot's Garand worked rhythmically beside me. Bang, clink, exhales, his breath counting each clip hit. Morales braced BAR one-handed, other arm still sling-bound, muzzle flame framed his bandaged grin. Enemy return fire snapped over reeds, rounds whining overhead. Bullets hissed through the river skin like angry eels. Engineers never hesitated. Second ponton slid, then a third, and a chain of pallets wobbled into a makeshift causeway. Malloy waved the first squad across, boots pounding plywood, boards flexing. We kept firing slow, careful. Ammo jarred in pockets, not endless, despite yesterday's resupply. Enemy mortars belched somewhere inland, low thuds, then shell splashes upriver, geysers showering the far bank more than bridge. Their range-finding was blind guesswork in the flare glare. 3 more panels, then our turn. Pena thrust 2 fingers at me and Hendershot, commanding, "Go!" We sprinted, feet hammering slats, slick with river spray. I felt the waters chill through soles as plywood dipped. Halfway, another flare went up, bright as noon. We froze mid-stride, exposed, rifles high. For one absurd heartbeat, the scene looked staged. Marines balanced on a floating sidewalk, snow swirling around searchlight flare, enemy muzzles winking across the gap. We dashed the rest, boots splashing onto gritty mud. Instant we hit shore, we dropped to prone, rifles outward. Chinese voices scattered in reeds ahead. One soldier broke cover, running sideways, carbine rattling. Hendershot dropped him with a single shot, clip-ping echoing off Stone Pier. I flanked left, cut a line through thin brush, bayonet ready. A pair of sappers crouched over a canvas satchel, maybe more charges. They spun as I loomed, eyes wide in flare bloom. I shouted for surrender. They hesitated just long enough. Pena's backup squad surged, herded them at rifle point. No time for POW protocol. We zip-tied wrists, shoved them downhill toward the ponton so command could decide. By 0500, the causeway took vehicle weight. Trucks crept over, axles groaning, drivers white-knuckled. Last across came the dozer, blade scraping ponton seams, almost shearing one free, but the chain held. Malloy exhaled for the first time in an hour, muttering thank yous to every saint he'd ever ignored. We remounted, soaked socks icing against boots. Dawn bled orange behind distant peaks. The convoy pushed downhill, engines throttling higher now, the grade eased. Somewhere back on that ruined shore, enemy fire rumbled. Late. Pointless. Mid-morning we reached a crossroads where MPs waved directions to division staging. Banners painted hastily on parachute silk snapped in wind. Arrows for aid, ammo, mess. We veered into the ammo branch again, but supply chiefs shook heads. Rationing now, rumor of another push west near Jinju draining stock. Each rifle got 40 rounds, 1 grenade. Gravely, "Make it hymn-book accurate, boys," the chief said. Malloy split the load, eyes calculating our last firefight's appetite. We weren't low, but the gauge felt closer to E than F. Hendershot counted clips like a banker, tucked 1 extra down boot shaft. Afternoon, we dug a temporary perimeter on a low spur guarding a fuel dump. Rows of 55-gallon drums stacked like giant dominoes. 1 stray shell, and the ridge would torch like kindling. Engineers erected sandbag walls. We layered rifles, BAR, 2 water-cooled 30s pinwheeling coverage. The dump commander, a Navy lieutenant with headset permaglue to his ear, swore the Chinese had infiltrators in every hedgerow. He looked at our frost-cracked faces, blood-rusted bayonets, and relaxed a hair. "Relieved Marines," he sighs. "That'll tick the odds." Night dropped quick, bringing a front of sleet that rattled cans and tin helmets. Visibility shrank to 6 feet. Even muzzle flashes fuzzed into halos. Perfect cloak for infiltrators. Double watches posted. Pena paired me with a fresh replacement, PSC Rosselli. Pink cheeks not yet smoked by cordite. He admitted Chosin was his first action. I told him calmly, keep the front sight halfway up a man and let the rifle do the rest. He nodded like committing scripture. Hours crawled. Sleet soaked parka sleeves, refroze when wind gusted. Every drum creak sounded like a footstep. At 2300, flares popped southeast. Another sector lighting an incursion. Distant small arms rolled. Then heavy 50 cals barked like thunder, convincing kids to hide under beds. Our line tensed, but nothing moved through the sleet veil. Just after midnight, I spotted low shapes wriggling up drainage ditch. Could have been dogs, but instinct shouted humans. I tapped Rosselli, pointed. We tracked sights, breath shallow. 20 yards, shapes rose. 3 figures in dark padded coats, burp guns cradled. My Garen thundered. Rosselli followed a heartbeat later. 2 figures toppled, the third dashed behind drums. Urgent. Grenade? I yanked porcelain head from belt. Lobbed high, it clinked metal. Detonated with a whump that punched a flame bloom, but thank God didn't cook the fuel. No further movement. We waited stiff-backed, an hour. Sleet matting hair inside helmets. But nothing else came. Dawn revealed the 2 intruders sprawled partly inside ditch, both Chinese regulars, satchel charges strapped across backs. The third left a blood trail that vanished into scrub. Malloy praised our restraint, then ordered me and Rosselli to salvage the satchels for intel. We pried lids, saw memo books sealed in wax bags, diagrams of the fuel yard. They'd planned to blow drums, torch supply, bottle our route. The thought of our convoy trapped between burning rivers of fuel turned stomachs. Rosselli dry heaved, then steadied.
Intelligence jeep scooped the satchels. By noon, orders came. We'd cover withdrawal of the dump, Navy packing barrels onto flatbeds heading south to Massan Port. Once the last truck rolled, our battalion would conduct a fighting fallback along the highway, leapfrogging roadblocks all the way to the beachhead for final evacuation. Another retreat, but this time orderly, controlled, command hoped. Pack up became frenzy. Crane trucks clanged drums onto trailers, chains singing. MPs flagged traffic, shouting coordinates. Dust and sleet mingled into gray slurry, coating lungs. We formed skirmish boxes around each departing load, rifles scanning tree lines. First convoy out made half a mile before mortars bracketing the road forced detour through rice paddies, solid enough to bear weight. Luck more than plan. Our squad rode atop last fuel flatbed, nestled between drums reeking diesel. One tracer would turn us molten, but speed beat caution. Driver shoved the throttle, turbo whine rising. Frost air tore tears from eyes, whipped harmonica right out of Hendershot's pocket. It flew somewhere along ditch, a silver note swallowed by wind. He just laughed, thin, amazed. Guess the war wants its music back. We leapfrog south all afternoon, dismount at ambush bends, trade shots with snipers hidden in bamboo, mount again before mortar zeroed. Ammo shrank, 30 rounds, then 20. Each trigger squeeze weighed like a courtroom sentence. Sunset found us at a junction overlooking the estuary. Through haze we saw ship masts, funnels, cranes dipping like herons. Evacuation zone. The approach road, of course, wasn't free. Chinese recoilless rifles punched shells from ridge bunkers, guarding the last hairpin. A column of rock trucks smoldered there, burning out crews unlucky by minutes. Malloy ordered one final breakout charge, push through, silence guns, open path for the rest. Bayonets fixed, rifles on semi, one round at a time. We set off at a dead run behind the tank dozer that had survived 2 bridges and a mountain pass. Its blade plowed burning wreckage aside, sparks shooting. Enemy gunners fired point blank, rounds pinging off armor, zipping through our ranks. I felt the air sheer beside ear, heard someone grunt behind me but never looked. Halfway up the slope we peeled left, clambered terraces cut for soybeans, boots slipping on greasy mud. Chinese gun pit loomed, dark slit under sandbag roof. Lanigan hurled grenade, ducked, blast flung bodies and sand. We poured over the parapet, rifles stabbing muzzle flashes into corners. One gun crew tried spinning piece. Hendershot shot loader through throat, shout strangled into gurgle. I vaulted wooden step, bayonet skewering gunner's chest, momentum skidding both of us across bamboo mat. Tunnel quieted. Other pits fell to sister squads. Whistle blasts signaled cleared. In 15 minutes the gauntlet lay silent, save for crackle of burning trucks. Relieved. Clear route. Convoy engines roared forward, headlights masked but glowing enough to guide. We marched alongside the lead flatbed, rifles dangling, exhaustion far past measure. Estuary breeze hit, salty, wet, almost warm. Ships at anchor switched on deck lights, great floating constellations promising soup, bunks, distance. Rockets from friendly destroyers arced overhead, hammering distant hills to discourage pursuit. Their detonations felt like a door slamming on a nightmare.
On pier bulkhead, sailors waved us in, their silhouettes fuzzed by floodlights. We herded the last fuel trucks onto a tank landing craft whose deck stank of oil, rope, hope. Once ramps raised, engines reversed, frothy prop wash pushed us into channel. I leaned on railing, legs shaking uncontrollably. Now danger paused long enough to notice. Hendershot appeared, minus harmonica, a crooked smile under grime. "Trade you," he said, and pressed into my palm half a can of peaches he'd saved since the rail yard. I took a bite, sweet, syrupy, absurdly bright like eating August sunlight in deepest winter. We chewed, watching coastline fade, tracer streaks dwindling to fireflies, bugles unheard beneath diesel rumble and gull cry. When the shore was a thin charcoal line, I fished the 2 captured bugles from my pack. One battered, one pristine, save for dried blood at bell rim. I lifted the cleaner horn, breathed deep of briny air, and blew not a battle call, but taps, slow, mournful, cracked by salt wind. Notes fluttered over dark water, barely reaching midship, yet a hush spread along deck. Men removed helmets, heads bowed, even engines idled momentarily lower, as if machinery understood. The last note faded into wave slap. I set the horn down, throat thick. Hendershot looked east, where dawn would rise behind mountains we might never see again. Then back at me, wearily. "Think that's the last of it?" he asked. I didn't answer. Somewhere beyond the dark horizon, other ridges waited, other bugles. But for tonight, the sea felt wider than the war, and the deck beneath our boots vibrated with forward motion, toward refit, toward rest, maybe toward home. I rested my rifle against the rail, felt the barrel cool in moist wind, and closed my eyes to the rhythm of turbines driving us out beyond the range of every shore gun on Earth. Sea and sky blended to a single sheet of charcoal the first 2 days out. The horizon erased so completely that the ship felt suspended in a vast slate void. Only the churn of the screws underfoot proved we were moving, tracing an invisible groove toward someplace warmer and less haunted. Spray rattled against bulkheads, fused with soot from the stack, and dried to a gritty film that coated everything, including the cots we'd claimed in the tank deck. I woke that third dawn to a hollow creak of hull plates, a rhythm that threaded through half-dreams of bugles and snow. Above, bare light bulbs swung on frayed cords, painting slow arcs across rows of sleeping Marines. Frost still tipped our breath, but it smelled faintly of diesel and coffee instead of pine smoke and cordite. I sat up, joints protesting, and looked for my rifle. Automatic habit. Before remembering, it lay in the armory rack, tagged with my name, finally beyond arm's reach. The sudden lightness on my shoulder felt wrong, like leaving skin behind. Hendershot snored 2 bunks over, face half buried in wadded parka that now served as a pillow.
Morales had been stretchered up to sickbay after his arm wound seeped through dressings again. Rumor said the corpsman threatened amputation if infection spread, but the ship's doctor pumped him full of penicillin and prayers. I wondered whether he'd kept count of that BAR belt, 600 reasons to try him, before fainting under morphine. Mess call echoed down steel ladders, a clang of ladles on pans that traveled like sonar through the ship's ribs. I shuffled aft with the tide of bodies. No drill field order here, just hungry men drifting toward caloric salvation. Breakfast was powdered eggs whipped to rubber, 2 slices of bread, an aluminum cup of something resembling oatmeal, and coffee so strong my tongue tingled. I ate on the weather deck, leaning against a lifeline, watching waves slap the hull in lazy slate slabs. Every roll tipped my plate enough to shove eggs toward the scupper. I shoveled them back. Chew, swallow, chew, mechanical. Somewhere amid the clatter, a boatswain's pipe shrilled, followed by the loud hailer. "Now hear this! Now hear this! All hands prepare to enter Sasebo Harbor in 3 hours. Clean ship for port." The words landed like a foreign language. Land? People in streets? Yet the murmur spreading down the rail felt electric. Men straightened, swiped grime from collars, tucked dog-eared playing cards and morphine syrettes deeper into pockets. One guy even combed hair with a fork. Habit takes strange shapes when normalcy knocks. I spent the next hour on paint-chipping duty along the starboard catwalk, scraper in one hand, palm sander in the other, knocking rust scabs loose so the hull wouldn't shame the skipper at dock. Each chip flew like a chunk of old memory, flakes spiraling to sea. As I worked, gulls began to appear, wheeling overhead, their screeches cutting through engine drone. Land birds meant land smells. Diesel mixed with jasmine from hills I couldn't see yet, charcoal smoke from cook fires. Something sweet, citrus, carried on a breeze lazy enough to forget war existed. At last the coastline edged into view. Green-brown slopes terraced with winter barley, white houses clustered like shells at the waterline, the roofs gleaming damp. Sasebo proper hid behind the first ridge, but antenna masts pierced low cloud like bayonets aimed skyward. Tugboats chugged out, decks crowded with sailors in blue dungarees, tossing lines thick as thighs. Our ship answered with a rumble of bow thrusters, a low mechanical growl that felt almost polite after weeks of violence. Tied up, the ramp clanged down, and the odor of mudflats flooded aboard, ripe, earthy, alive. We filed off in squads, boots clomping metal, then wood, then concrete, each change in surface singing under soles. A Navy band waited in crisp whites despite chill wind, trumpets glinting. They didn't play, just stood at ease, maybe because some captain figured brass fanfare for half-frozen grunts would feel like mockery. I appreciated the silence. We were herded into a Quonset warehouse, rebranded processing and refit. Inside, rows of folding tables groaned with clipboards, vaccination trays, and boxes of new uniforms smelling of mothballs. First station, medical triage. A nurse looked at the slice on my calf where a burp gun round had kissed me during the fuel dump fight. She cleaned it, dabbed iodine, slapped on gauze, matter-of-fact said, "You're lucky, another inch and you were hobbling home on a stick." I nodded, lips numb, words stuck behind teeth. Next table issued fresh dungarees. I stripped to skivvies, skin mottled purple-white from weeks of frost. The petty officer glanced at my dog tags, tossed me a bundle 2 sizes too big. Teasingly, "Eat a few chow runs and you'll fill it in, devil dog." I laughed, a short bark that surprised me more than him. Chuckles. Paperwork swelled until it felt heavier than any pack. Supply requisitions, casualty statements, paybook updates. They asked for next of kin confirmation. I wrote my mother's name slower than the rifle serial numbers I'd logged 1,000 times, because my hand trembled in sudden recognition that I could mail a letter now without worrying it might arrive after news of my death. We marched from the shed to a bathhouse, a low building where steam oozed from louvered windows. Inside, heated pools gleamed emerald, fed by pipes snaking overhead. Commanding, "10 minutes only," a corpsman barked. I slid into water hot enough to flay nerves. The sting bloomed into bliss, muscles unspooling. Grime floated in oily swirls. Across the pool, Hendershot sank to chin, eyes closed, harmonica gone, palms open, on tile rim like he still held it in sleep. Steam blurred the scars on his knuckles until he looked almost civilian. The whistle shrieked long before my bones were ready. We dragged towel over skin pink as boiled shrimp, then shuffled into a staging area where Red Cross volunteers handed out donuts and cocoa. The first sip shocked. Sweet, creamy, alive in a way trench coffee could never mimic. Every gulp felt like adding color back to a black and white reel. A volunteer, gray hair, lipstick smudged by smiles, pressed a postcard into my palm, pre-printed, "I am well, writing soon." I signed my name, folded it into breast pocket, promising myself I'd send a real letter before shipping out again. Temporary barracks waited on a hill above dock, bamboo grove whispering on one side, power station hum on the other. Inside, spring beds lined in ranks. Metal lockers held sheets, cigarettes, Gideon Bibles. Morales lay on an upper bunk, arm in rigid cast now, but color better, his grin crooked. Proudly, "Docs say I keep the wing," he announced. Cheers rose, quiet but genuine. Sea and sky blended to a single sheet of charcoal the first 2 days out. The horizon erased so completely that the ship felt suspended in a vast slate void. Only the churn of the screws underfoot proved we were moving, tracing an invisible groove towards someplace warmer and less haunted. Spray rattled against bulkheads, fused with soot from the stack, and dried to a gritty film that coated everything, including the cots we'd claimed in the tank deck. I woke that third dawn to a hollow creak of hull plates, a rhythm that threaded through half-dreams of bugles and snow. Above, bare light bulbs swung on frayed cords, painting slow arcs across rows of sleeping Marines. Frost still tipped our breath, but it smelled faintly of diesel and coffee instead of pine smoke and cordite. I sat up, joints protesting, and looked for my rifle. Automatic habit. Before remembering, it lay in the armory rack, tagged with my name, finally beyond arm's reach. The sudden lightness on my shoulder felt wrong,
like leaving skin behind. Hendershot snored 2 bunks over, face half buried in wadded parka that now served as a pillow. Morales had been stretchered up to sickbay after his arm wound seeped through dressings again. Rumor said the corpsman threatened amputation if infection spread, but the ship's doctor pumped him full of penicillin and prayers. I wondered whether he'd kept count of that BAR belt, 600 reasons to try him, before fainting under morphine.
Lights out scheduled for 2200, but nobody slept. Some smoked on the steps, exhaling ghosts of the reservoir into starry dark. Others traded rumors, rotation to Okinawa, maybe Tokyo shore leave, maybe straight back to Masan. I sat on my bunk, cleaning the bayonet edge with whetstone borrowed from supply. Each pass of stone whispered across steel, stroke, pause, stroke, until the blade gleamed like snow crust under flare light. When done, I slid it home, not knowing if I'd draw it again or mount it on a mantle someday. Before taps, mail clerk entered with a sack. He read names, each answered with a grunt or a "Here!" My heart thumped dumbly until he hit mine. Letter from Mom, postmark November, somehow riding luck to meet me here. I broke the seal, unfolded careful, wistfully. Son, we strung the porch lights early this year in case you glimpse them from wherever the Lord carries you. Her handwriting wavered, lines wandering as though the ink marched uphill too. She wrote of Dad patching the Chevy for when I'd drive it again, of ration stamps and gingerbread shortages, of small-town gossip. Nothing about worry, though each sentence trembled with it. At the end, she'd drawn a tiny Christmas tree, ornaments colored with kids' crayons she borrowed from church. I traced the outline with a grimy thumbnail, felt the paper pulse like a second heartbeat. I looked up to find Hendershot watching from his bunk. He raised brows. Good news? I nodded, folded the letter, slid it under a pillow like a charm. Lights dimmed. The barracks settled into a symphony of breaths, bed springs, distant ship horns at anchor. I lay on my back, staring at rafters where knots in wood grain formed galaxies. Somewhere beyond those beams, a world rolled on. Football games, jukebox dances, perfume on warm skin, places we'd left at the reservoir's edge. My eyelids grew heavy, yet mine drifted along the keel of memory. The hiss of snow under boots, the tremor of bugle notes swallowed by wind, the reverberation of a ship's deck under taps blown for both enemy and friend. Sleep slid in, soft as tidewash on sand, and I let it take me without rifle in arms, without helmet strap cutting chin, only the faint scent of cocoa on breath. And the knowledge, more precious than cartridges, that tomorrow dawn would rise without orders to march into killing frost. Whatever came next, this night existed, uncontested, a full heartbeat of quiet between thunderclaps.